Hey there, welcome to Broderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. Have you ever heard a voice when no one was there? A whisper so faint it might have been just the wind, yet somehow forming words that chill your blood? I was never one to believe in ghosts. The supernatural was for campfire stories and late-night movies, not for an analytical mind like mine. My name is Daniel Foster, and until 3 weeks ago, I was a railway historian documenting abandoned stations across New England. Until 3 weeks ago, I was a skeptic. Until 3 weeks ago, I slept soundly through the night. The Black River Station stood like a forgotten sentinel at the edge of town, its Victorian architecture crumbling under decades of neglect. Built in 1882, it had once been the pride of this small coastal community, connecting it to the bustling cities beyond. Now it was a hollow shell, scheduled for demolition in the spring. My job was simply to photograph and document its historical features before the wrecking ball claimed it. I arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, the October air crisp with the promise of an early winter. The station's facade was impressive even in decay, ornate cornices and weathered brick, tall arched windows that reflected the setting sun like dying embers. Most people would find beauty in such architecture. I merely saw data points from my report. The station manager, an elderly man named Walter with rheumy eyes and gnarled hands, met me at the main entrance. His keyring jingled unnaturally loud in the stillness. "Been waiting for someone to take interest in this old place," he said, voice gravelly from years of cigarettes. "Though most folks stay away now." I nodded absently, more interested in the structural details than local superstitions. "I'll need access to all areas, including the platforms and any basement levels." Walter's eyes narrowed slightly. "Including track 7? "All tracks," I confirmed, not noticing how his hand trembled as he unlocked the main doors. "Just don't stay after sunset," he warned. "Building's not safe in the dark. Electrical problems." I assured him I'd be gone by 5, though I had every intention of documenting the station at night as well. Historical buildings revealed different aspects in varying light conditions, at least that's what I told myself. In truth, I enjoyed the solitude of empty spaces after hours. The interior smelled of dust and dampness, with undertones of something metallic, old railings perhaps, or the lingering scent of trains long gone. Sunlight filtered through dirty windows, casting elongated shadows across the marble floor. The main hall was cavernous, with a vaulted ceiling and ticket booths lining one wall. My footsteps echoed as I walked, the sound seeming to multiply as if others walked with me. I began my systematic documentation, moving clockwise through the building. The waiting rooms, once elegant spaces with leather seating and polished wood, now stood bare and forlorn. The administrative offices yielded little of interest, empty filing cabinets and desks stripped of anything valuable. It was when I reached the platforms that I first felt it, a subtle shift in the air, like the building itself had drawn a breath. I paused, camera halfway to my eye, and listened. Nothing but the distant call of seagulls and the occasional creak of settling wood. Platforms 1 through 6 were unremarkable, differing only in their states of decay. But as I approached platform 7, located at the farthest end of the station, something changed. The temperature dropped noticeably, and the ambient sound seemed to dampen, as if I had stepped into a recording studio. Even the daylight appeared thinner here, struggling to penetrate the gloom. Platform 7 was narrower than the others, with a strange curvature that bent away from the main building. The tracks themselves vanished into a tunnel whose mouth was obscured by shadow despite the afternoon sun. According to my research, this line had serviced the overnight trains to Boston until 1959, when a tragic accident closed it permanently. I raised my camera, framing a shot of the platform's unique architectural elements, when my viewfinder caught something, a flicker of movement at the tunnel's entrance. I lowered the camera quickly, staring with naked eyes, but saw nothing. Convincing myself it was just a bird or perhaps shifting debris, I continued my work. The day progressed uneventfully after that. I filled my memory cards with hundreds of images, made detailed notes about structural features, and measured doorways and windows for my report. By 4:30, my research was nearly complete, except for the basement levels and the station master's tower, which I'd saved for tomorrow. As I was packing my equipment, I noticed Walter watching me from the main entrance. His expression was unreadable in the dying light. "Find everything you were looking for?" he asked, his voice oddly flat. "Just about," I replied. "I'll need to come back tomorrow for the basement and tower." He nodded slowly. "Tower's fine. Basement flooded years ago. Nothing to see." Something in his tone made me pause. Was there water damage to the original structures? That would be important for my report. Walter's eyes shifted away. "Nothing important down there. Just storage and old equipment." My curiosity was piqued now. In my experience, people rarely discouraged exploration without reason. I'll still need to document it. Historical thoroughness and all that. He seemed about to argue further, but instead shrugged. "Your funeral," he muttered, then louder, "lock up when you leave. I'm heading home." The heavy main doors closed behind him with a resonant thud that echoed through the empty station. I stood alone in the growing darkness, suddenly aware of how quiet the building had become. No creaks, no settling sounds, no distant traffic noise penetrating the thick walls. Just stillness, deep and expectant. I should have left then. I had enough material for a preliminary report. The basement could wait for daylight. But professional curiosity, or perhaps something else, something I couldn't yet name, kept me there. I switched on my powerful flashlight and headed for the stairs leading down. The door was unlocked, contrary to Walter's implication that the area was inaccessible. As I descended, the air grew colder and damper, carrying that same metallic scent I noticed earlier, only stronger now. The basement was extensive, a labyrinth of narrow corridors and small rooms. My flashlight beam cut through darkness that seemed almost viscous, revealing stained concrete walls and rusted pipes. There was indeed evidence of flooding. Watermarks stained the lower portions of the walls, but the floor was currently dry. I moved methodically through the space, photographing architectural details and making notes. Most rooms contained nothing but debris and dust. But as I ventured deeper, I began to feel a growing sense of unease. The silence down here was absolute, swallowing even the sound of my footsteps. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. In the farthest corner of the basement, beneath platform 7, I found a door different from the others. Heavier, made of metal instead of wood, with no handle on the outside, only a keyhole. I checked my watch, 5:25. Still enough time to pick up my equipment upstairs and leave before full dark. But that door... As I stood contemplating whether to mark it for tomorrow's exploration, I heard it, faint but unmistakable. A voice, speaking words I couldn't quite make out, coming from behind the metal door. "Hello?" I called, immediately feeling foolish. This section of the building had been abandoned for decades. There couldn't be anyone here. The voice stopped abruptly. Then, after a moment of silence that seemed to stretch endlessly, it came again, closer now, as if the speaker had moved right up to the other side of the door. "The 8:15 is always late," it whispered, the words somehow perfectly clear despite their softness. "Always late, but it always arrives." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the basement's temperature. I backed away from the door, my flashlight beam wavering as my hand began to shake. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to sound authoritative despite the fear creeping into my voice. No answer came, but as I retreated down the corridor, I could have sworn I heard the soft click of a lock turning, followed by the grinding of rusty hinges as the handleless door began, ever so slowly, to open inward. I didn't stay to see what might emerge. Professional curiosity be damned, I turned and ran, taking the stairs two at a time, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. Only when I reached the main hall did I pause to catch my breath, feeling ridiculous in the fading daylight that still streamed through the high windows. Of course, there was a rational explanation. Old buildings settled. Pipes contracted in the cold. Wind found pathways through cracks in the foundation. I was a historian, a man of facts and documentation. I didn't believe in ghosts. As I gathered my equipment, I glanced at the large clock above the main entrance. 5:47. The station would be completely dark soon. I needed to leave. But as I headed for the exit, a sound stopped me in my tracks, the unmistakable rumble of an approaching train, growing louder by the second. Impossible. These tracks hadn't been used in over 60 years. I turned slowly toward platform 7, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't explain. Through the archways leading to the platforms, I saw it, not the train itself, but its light, a beam cutting through gathering darkness, accompanied by the rhythmic clacking of wheels on tracks and the shrill warning of a whistle. The station's old PA system crackled to life, startling me so badly I dropped my camera bag. Now arriving on platform 7, announced a voice that sounded nothing like Walter's, tinny and distant as if traveling across decades, the 8:15 overnight service to Boston. "All passengers for the final journey, please proceed to platform 7. The clock above the entrance still read 5:47. It hadn't moved. I stood frozen, every rational explanation evaporating in the face of what I was experiencing. The train whistle sounded again, closer now, more insistent. And beneath it, almost too quiet to hear, came the sound of footsteps, dozens of them, moving across the marble floor of the main hall. Moving toward platform 7. Moving past me, through me, as if I weren't there at all. I felt them as cold patches of air, momentary pressures against my skin. And though I saw nothing, I knew with terrible certainty what they were: passengers boarding a train that had met with tragedy decades ago, repeating their final journey night after night after night. My legs finally responded to the desperate signals from my brain. I ran for the exit, fumbling with the lock before bursting out into the cool evening air. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, and even then, I sat with hands trembling on the steering wheel for long minutes before I could compose myself enough to drive. That night, I tried to convince myself I had imagined it all: stress, perhaps, or exhaustion from hours of detailed work in poor lighting. But when I closed my eyes, I heard that whisper again: the 8:15 is always late. Always late, but it always arrives. I didn't return to Black River Station the next day, or the day after. But on the third night, I found myself driving past it, slowing as I approached. The building stood dark against the night sky, silent and seemingly abandoned. Except for platform 7, where a faint light glowed from within, and the shadowy figures of waiting passengers gathered for a train that had crashed over 60 years ago. I keep driving. But I know now what Walter knew, that some history can't be merely documented. Some history refuses to remain in the past. And some trains, once set in motion, never truly reach their destination. The 8:15 is always late, but it always arrives. And one night, I fear I might find myself drawn back to Platform 7, ticket in hand, waiting to board. What happens when time folds back on itself, trapping those caught in its creases? I've been asking myself this question since my encounter at Black River Station 3 nights ago. Sleep has become my enemy. Every time I close my eyes, I hear the distant whistle of that ghostly train and feel the brush of invisible passengers moving past me. During the day, I convince myself it was all a hallucination brought on by the poor air quality in that decaying building. But nights are different. I told myself I wouldn't go back. I even called my supervisor, Thomas, making excuses about a family emergency that required my immediate attention. He was understanding but reminded me that the demolition team would need my report by the end of the month. I promised to return and complete my work soon. That was 2 days ago. Now I sit in my car outside the station, gripping the steering wheel as evening approaches. The logical part of my brain insists on being ridiculous, that I simply need to finish my documentation during daylight hours and be gone before dusk. The rest of me screams to drive away and never look back. Yet here I am. Because beneath the fear lies something else, curiosity. A need to understand what I experienced. After all, I'm a historian. Evidence and documentation are my life's work. The station looks different in the late afternoon light, less foreboding, more melancholy. Its weathered facade reminds me of an elderly face, lined with stories and secrets. I gather my camera equipment, my voice recorder, and new additions to my toolkit, a high-powered flashlight and an electromagnetic field detector I purchased from a paranormal investigation supply website. I feel slightly foolish carrying the latter, but if something unusual is happening here, perhaps it can be measured and documented. Walter isn't at the entrance today. Instead, I use the key he gave me that first day, letting myself into the cavernous main hall. My footsteps echo off the marble floor and vaulted ceiling, amplifying the solitude. The station feels emptier than before, if that's possible, as if even the dust motes have abandoned it. I place my equipment on a bench and set up my digital recorder. Black River Station Survey, Day 2, I speak clearly into the microphone. Friday, October 15th, 3:45 p.m. Temperature outside is 52 degrees Fahrenheit, partly cloudy. I pause, then add, focusing today on the station master's tower and completing documentation of the main concourse and waiting areas. We'll attempt to verify or disprove anomalous experiences from previous visit. The station master's tower is accessible via a narrow spiral staircase behind what was once the ticket office. As I climb, the steps creak underfoot, announcing my presence to the empty building. The tower itself is a small hexagonal room with windows on all sides, offering a panoramic view of the tracks below and the town beyond. Despite layers of grime on the glass, the visibility is impressive. The room contains a desk, an ancient switchboard, and a large clock that, surprisingly, still ticks steadily. The time reads 4:17, accurate to my watch. On the walls hang yellow train schedules and a large chalkboard where departures would once have been written. Something about the chalkboard catches my eye. Most of it has been erased, leaving only ghostly smudges, but in the bottom right corner, written in a shaky hand, are the words 8:15 to Boston, Cancelled. Below that, in different handwriting, never cancelled. Only delayed. I snapped several photographs of the board, then turned to the desk. Most of the drawers are empty, but the bottom one contains a leather-bound logbook. Its pages are brittle with age, and I carefully flipped through them, finding routine entries about train arrivals and departures, staff assignments, and weather conditions. Then I reached November 12, 1959. The entry for that day is brief. 8:15 overnight service to Boston departed 22 minutes late due to track maintenance. 73 passengers. Clear night, light wind from northeast, final service on track 7. The entry ends there, with no explanation of why it was the final service. No mention of an accident or tragedy. The next day's log is written in a different hand, with no reference to the previous night's events. A quick check of my historical records on my tablet reveals the bare facts. On November 12, 1959, the overnight train from Black River to Boston derailed in Haskins Tunnel, 3 miles from the station. 47 passengers were killed. The official cause was listed as mechanical failure, but local newspapers hinted at negligence by the railway company. Track 7 was closed permanently after the incident. I spent another hour in the tower, documenting its features and searching for additional information, but find nothing more about the accident. As I prepared to descend, I noticed the light has changed, the warm afternoon sun replaced by the cooler hues of approaching evening. My watch reads 5:35. I still have time to gather my things and leave before dark. Back in the main concourse, I methodically photographed the remaining architectural details I missed on my first visit. The EMF detector sits silent on the bench beside my bag, its needle barely registering the ambient electromagnetic fields. Then, at precisely 5:47, I check my watch to confirm the temperature in the station drops noticeably. I can see my breath clouding in front of me. The EMF detector springs to life, its needle swinging wildly as the device emits a high-pitched whine. "Hello?" I call out, my voice sounding thin in a vast space. "Is someone here?" No response, but the EMF detector continues its frantic activity. I grab my voice recorder and speak into it. Sudden temperature drop, estimated 10 to 15 degrees. Strong EMF readings throughout the concourse. Time is 5:48 p.m. I move toward platform 7, drawn by the same inexplicable compulsion I felt during my first visit. The EMF detector's pitch intensifies as I approach the archway leading to the platforms. Platform 7 looks different today, cleaner somehow, less decayed. The wooden benches that had been broken and rotting now appear merely weathered. The faded advertisements on the walls seem brighter, their colors less diminished by time. Even the air feels different here, charged, expectant. I raise my camera and begin taking photographs, moving systematically along the platform. Through the viewfinder, I notice something odd. Where the platform should end at the tunnel entrance, it now appears to extend further, disappearing into darkness. I lower the camera and look with my naked eyes, but see only the familiar dead end of the abandoned track. Optical illusion, I mutter to myself, but my heart is racing. I raise the camera again, and through the lens, I see a figure standing at the far end of the extended platform, a man in what appears to be a conductor's uniform, looking directly at me. I jerk away from the viewfinder, blinking rapidly. The platform before me is empty. I look through the camera again, but now I see only what my eyes see, an abandoned platform ending in a dark tunnel entrance. My hand is shaking as I check my watch, 5:58. I should leave. Now. But as I turn to go, the station's PA system crackles to life with a burst of static that makes me jump. "Attention passengers," comes a voice, clearer than during my previous visit. "The 8:15 service to Boston will be delayed by approximately 20 minutes due to track maintenance. We apologize for any inconvenience." The announcement ends with another burst of static, then silence. The clock on the wall still reads 5:47, frozen in time. My scientific mind scrambles for explanations. Some kind of recording triggered by vibrations? A prankster with access to the old systems? But deep down, I know these explanations are inadequate for what's happening around me. I should run. Every instinct tells me to flee. But instead, I set up my tripod and attach my camera, setting it to take photographs at 5-second intervals. If something is going to appear, I want proof. While the camera does its work, I walk slowly along platform 7, the EMF detector held out before me like a divining rod. Its needle swings erratically, the whine rising and falling without apparent pattern. The temperature continues to drop until I'm shivering despite my heavy jacket. Near the end of the platform, just before the tunnel entrance, I find something I missed on my first visit, a small plaque, tarnished and nearly invisible against the weathered wall. I wipe away years of crime to reveal an inscription. "In memory of those who departed from this platform on November 12, 1959, and never reached their destination. May they find their way home." Below are listed 47 names. As I read the last name, the lights on platform 7 flicker, then strengthen, illuminating the space with a warm glow that wasn't present before. The decay seems to recede further, the platform transforming before my eyes into a well-maintained, functioning part of a busy station. And I am no longer alone. They materialize gradually, not appearing suddenly like special effects in a movie, but slowly gaining substance, as if assembling themselves from the very air. Men in hats and overcoats, women in dresses and heels appropriate for the late 50s, children clutching the hands of their parents. None look directly at me. They stand patiently, some checking watches, others making small talk I can't quite hear. I remain frozen, unable to run, unable even to reach for my voice recorder to document what I'm seeing. These aren't menacing apparitions from a horror movie, just ordinary people waiting for a train. But the knowledge of what awaits them fills me with dread. A man in a business suit passes so close to me that I feel the brush of his sleeve against mine. His face is thoughtful, preoccupied with whatever awaits him in Boston. A young woman stands near the edge of the platform, a small suitcase at her feet, nervously twisting a handkerchief between gloved fingers. A family of 4, parents and 2 small boys, sit on a bench, the father reading a newspaper, the mother gently admonishing the children to sit still. I recognize some of their names from the memorial plaque, and the realization makes my blood run cold. These aren't just random apparitions, they're the actual passengers who died that night, repeating their final moments in an endless loop. The PA system crackles again. Now approaching platform 7, the 8:15 overnight service to Boston. From the tunnel comes the distant rumble of an approaching train, the beam of its headlight cutting through the darkness. The waiting passengers gather their belongings, moving closer to the edge of the platform. My paralysis breaks. I stumble backward, away from the platform edge, away from these ghosts about to board a train to their doom. As I retreat, one of them, the young woman with the handkerchief, turns and looks directly at me. Her eyes widen in surprise, as if she actually sees me. Her lips move, forming words I can't hear over the growing rumble of the approaching train. She takes a step toward me, hand outstretched, but is jostled by other passengers moving forward as the train pulls into the station. I don't wait to see more. I run back through the archway into the main concourse, snatching my bag but leaving the tripod and camera behind. The EMF detector wails in my hand, its needle pinned to the maximum reading. The main doors won't open. I tug frantically at the handles, but they might as well be painted on the wall for all they move. Panic rises in my throat as I hear the train come to a stop at platform 7, the hiss of its brakes eerily loud in the station. Behind me, footsteps cross the marble floor, dozens of them, as the passengers make their way from the platform to the train. I press myself against the wall beside the door, holding my breath as they pass, invisible to my eyes now but undeniably present. Then a single set of footsteps approaches me directly. They stop just inches away. I feel a cold pressure on my arm, as if someone has placed a hand there. "You don't belong here," whispers a voice, the same one I heard in the basement, but clearer now. "Not yet. But I've been waiting for you, Daniel Foster." My name. It knows my name. The pressure on my arm increases, then pulls, guiding me away from the door toward platform 7. I resist, but the grip is surprisingly strong. "Let me go!" I cry out, my voice echoing in the now empty concourse. "I need your help," the voice insists. "We all do. We've been riding this train for too long." The invisible hand releases me, and I hear the footsteps retreat. The main doors suddenly swing open of their own accord, letting in a rush of cool evening air. I don't hesitate. I run to my car and drive away, hands shaking so badly I can barely grip the steering wheel. Only 1 mile from Black River Station do I pull over and try to process what just happened. The voice knew my name. It said it needed my help. What did that mean? In my haste, I left behind not only my expensive camera but the evidence it might have captured. Part of me never wants to return to that place. But another part, the historian, the documentarian, the seeker of truth, knows I have no choice. Because ghosts aren't supposed to be real. They aren't supposed to know your name. And they're definitely not supposed to ask for help. Yet as I sit in my car on the dark roadside, I can still feel the cold impression of fingers on my arm, still hear that whispered plea. And I know, with a certainty that defies all my rational beliefs, that I will return to platform 7. The passengers of the 8:15 to Boston have been waiting 60 years for their journey to end. And somehow, I've become their last hope of reaching their final destination. Can the dead recognize when someone is willing to listen? Do they sense an open mind, or is it merely desperation that drives them to reach across the veil? 3 days have passed since my second encounter at Black River Station. 3 days of researching the train crash of 1959, of scouring newspaper archives and local historical records for any information about the passengers who died. 3 days of questioning my sanity while simultaneously preparing to return to that place where reality seems to fold in on itself. I've learned little that might explain what I experienced. The official reports cite brake failure as the cause of the derailment, but I found whispered rumors in local papers of maintenance neglected, of corners cut to save money, of warnings ignored. The railway company, Eastern Coastal Lines, settled lawsuits with the families of the victims but never admitted wrongdoing. One detail caught my attention. The train's conductor, Frederick Harlow, was among the survivors. He sustained serious injuries but lived another 15 years before passing away in 1974. According to one article, Harlow never worked on the railways again and became something of a recluse after the accident. I also discovered that Harlow had a daughter, Margaret, who still lives in town. She would be in her 80s now, but according to the local directory, she resides in a retirement community just outside Black River. Perhaps she knows something about her father's experience, something that might help me understand what's happening at the station. But before I seek her out, I need to return to platform 7. I need my camera with the evidence it might contain. And, though I hesitate to admit it even to myself, I need to hear that voice again. The one that knew my name. The one that asked for help. I choose mid-afternoon for my return, when sunlight still streams through the station's high windows. Safety in daylight, an ancient human instinct I'm not too proud to heed. I bring new equipment to replace what I left behind, another camera, another EMF detector, and something I didn't have before, a digital thermometer to document the temperature drops I experienced. Walter is at the entrance when I arrive, sweeping debris from the steps with methodical, unhurried movements. He doesn't seem surprised to see me. "Thought you might be back," he says, leaning on his broom. "Most are." "Most what?" I ask. "Most who see them." His rheumy eyes study me. "You didn't you?" "The passengers?" A weight lifts from my shoulders at this confirmation that I'm not alone in my experience. "Yes. On platform 7. They were boarding the 8:15 train." Walter nods slowly. "Been happening for decades. Those poor souls, reliving their last moments night after night." He resumes his sweeping. "What did they say to you?" I hesitate, unsure how much to reveal. "One of them asked for help." Walter's broom stops mid-sweep. "Which one?" I couldn't see them clearly. Just heard a voice. "Male, I think." Walter's expression is unreadable. Never asked me for help. Just warned me away, told me I didn't belong. He studies me with new interest. "Must be something special about you, historian." Before I can respond, Walter returns to his sweeping, effectively ending the conversation. "Your equipment's still there. Nobody touches things on platform 7 after dark. Not if they're smart." I thank him and enter the station, relieved to find it bathed in afternoon sunlight, solid and real. The marble floor reflects the light streaming through the windows, creating luminous patterns that shift with the movement of clouds outside. In daylight, it's easier to appreciate the grandeur this place once possessed. My tripod and camera stand exactly where I left them 3 nights ago, untouched. I check the camera, its battery is dead, but the memory card is intact. I slip it into my pocket, planning to review the images later when I'm safely away from this place. Since I have several hours before sundown, I decide to complete my documentation of the main concourse. I work methodically, focusing on architectural details and taking measurements, avoiding platform 7 for now. The work is soothing, familiar, anchoring me in the routine of my profession. As the afternoon progresses, I find myself drawn to the basement door again. The memory of that metal door with no handle, the voice behind it, makes my palms sweat. But if I'm to understand what's happening here, I need to explore every aspect of this mystery. The basement is as cold and uninviting as before, but less intimidating in the knowledge that I'm not alone in my experiences. I move purposefully through the labyrinthine corridors, heading directly for that mysterious door beneath platform 7. It looks exactly the same, a heavy metal barrier with no external handle, just a keyhole. I run my flashlight beam over its surface, noticing details I missed before, faint engravings around the edges, patterns that might be decorative or might be something more. I trace them with my fingertips, feeling slight indentations in the metal. "Hello?" I call out, half expecting that whispered response. But the basement remains silent except for the distant drip of water somewhere in the darkness. I check my watch, 3:25. Hours before the phenomena begin. Perhaps whatever entities haunt this place are bound to specific times, the period leading up to the 8:15 departure. As I turn to leave, my flashlight beam catches something on the floor near the door, a small object partially hidden beneath decades of dust. I kneel down and carefully brush away the grime to reveal a pocket watch, its case tarnished silver, its chain broken as if torn from someone's vest. I pick it up gently, wiping away the remaining dust with my thumb. The case is engraved with intricate scrollwork and the initials F.H. Frederick Harlow, the train conductor who survived the crash. With trembling fingers, I press the release, and the case springs open to reveal the watch face. The glass is cracked, and the hands are frozen at 8:37, 22 minutes after the scheduled departure time of the train that crashed. I slip the watch into my pocket, feeling like I've found an important piece of the puzzle. Then, on an impulse, I press my ear against the metal door and listen. At first, there's nothing. Then, so faintly I might be imagining it, comes the ticking of a clock. Not the steady tick of a functioning timepiece, but erratic, like a watch trying to run with damaged gears. Tick, silence, tick-tick, silence, tick. I push away from the door, heart pounding. The sound continues for several seconds, then fades. I wait, but it doesn't return. Back upstairs, the station remains peaceful in the late afternoon light. My watch shows 4:12, still plenty of time before dusk. I set up my new camera on the tripod, positioning it to capture Platform 7 from the safety of the main concourse. Then I take out the pocket watch again, examining it more closely. The workmanship is exquisite. This was an expensive timepiece in its day. Inside the case, opposite the watch face, is an inscription, "To Frederick, with love on your promotion. May you always bring your passengers safely home. Elizabeth." A gift from his wife, perhaps. The irony of the inscription given what happened that November night is painful to contemplate. I'm so absorbed in studying the watch that I don't notice the change in the station until a shadow falls across me. Looking up, I'm startled to see the sun has moved lower in the sky, its angle creating deep shadows in the corners of the main hall. My watch now reads 5:23. How did over an hour pass without my noticing? The pocket watch in my hand feels suddenly cold, unnaturally so. I try to set it down, but my fingers won't obey. It's as if the watch is clinging to me, or I to it. A shiver runs through me as I realize what's happening. The watch is a conduit, a connection to its original owner. To Frederick Harlow. "Hello, Frederick," I say quietly, feeling slightly ridiculous but compelled to try. "Is that you who's been speaking to me?" The station remains silent, but the watch grows colder still, frost forming on its surface despite the temperature in the hall. I should be frightened, but instead I feel a strange calm, as if I'm finally making progress toward understanding. I walk toward Platform 7, the watch clutched in my fist, its cold burning into my palm. As I pass through the archway onto the platform, the quality of light changes, dimmer, yellowed, like old photographs. The sounds of the outside world fade, replaced by an expectant hush. The platform looks the same as during my previous visits, yet somehow more solid, more real. The decay is still evident, peeling paint, cracked tiles, but there's a vibrancy to it now, as if the space exists in two times simultaneously. I stand at the edge of Platform 7, looking down at the rusted tracks below. "I found your watch, Frederick," I say aloud. "I know you survived the crash. I know you never worked on the railways again. What are you trying to tell me?" The cold intensifies, spreading from the watch up my arm. The frost on the case thickens, forming intricate patterns like frozen ferns. And then, like a radio finding its frequency, a voice speaks, not in my ear as before, but seemingly from the watch itself. I should have died with them. The words are heavy with remorse, each syllable an effort, as if spoken across a great distance. The accident wasn't your fault, I reply, not knowing if this is true but sensing his guilt. I knew. The voice is clearer now. I knew the brakes were failing. I felt it when we left the station. I should have stopped the train immediately. My breath catches. This contradicts the official report, which claimed the brake failure occurred suddenly in the tunnel. Why didn't you? I asked gently. Schedules. Deadlines. Management breathing down our necks about delays. Bitterness edges his words. 22 minutes late already. Another delay would have meant my job. So I gambled. Thought we could make it to the next station. The watch burns colder in my hand, painful now, but I don't let go. That's why you're still here? Guilt? Not just me. All of us. Trapped in that moment. The decision. The crash. Over and over. All of you? Even the passengers? Especially the passengers. His voice breaks. They don't know they're dead. They board the train each night, expecting to reach Boston. But we never arrive. We crash in the tunnel, and then time resets. 5:47. Again and again. I check my watch, 5:39. 8 minutes until the cycle begins again. How can I help you? I ask, my voice barely above a whisper. The frost from the watch has spread to my forearm now, numbing my skin. The voice sounds closer, more desperate. My notebook. In the station master's office. Hidden compartment in the desk. The evidence. The warnings I received about the brakes. The orders to ignore them. Evidence that it wasn't just an accident? That the company knew? Yes. The word is exhaled like a sigh of relief. Find it. Make it known. Set us free. The watch suddenly burns hot, a violent shift that makes me cry out and nearly drop it. The frost vanishes in an instant, steam rising from its surface. Quickly, the voice urges, fading now. They're coming. Who's coming? I ask, but I know the answer even as the question leaves my lips. The temperature on platform 7 plummets. My digital thermometer, clipped to my belt, beeps a warning as it registers the rapid drop. The EMF detector in my pocket begins to whine, its pitch rising steadily. The light changes again, warmer now, gaslight yellow. The platform's decay recedes like a tide going out, revealing the station as it must have looked on that fateful night in 1959. The advertisements on the walls are new and colorful, the benches polished and intact, the platform clean and well maintained. And I am no longer alone. They materialize as they did before, gradually taking form from the air itself. The passengers of the 8:15 to Boston, oblivious to their fate, oblivious to the fact that they've relived this moment countless times. But something is different tonight. A man in a conductor's uniform stands at the far end of the platform, watching the passengers gather. His face is grave, troubled, the face of a man carrying a terrible burden. Frederick Harlow, not as he was when he died in 1974, but as he was that night, minutes before the disaster that would haunt him for the rest of his days. Our eyes meet across the platform, and I know he sees me. Unlike the passengers, he's aware. He knows what's happening. He lifts his hand in a gesture that might be greeting or warning. Then his gaze shifts to something behind me, and his expression changes to one of alarm. He mouths a word, "Run." I turn to find myself face to face with a man in an expensive suit, his features handsome but hard, his eyes cold. He looks solid, real, yet somehow wrong, like a photograph that's been subtly altered. The air around him seems darker, as if he absorbs light rather than reflects it. "You don't belong here," he says, his voice normal yet carrying an undertone that makes the hair on my neck rise. "This is private property. Railway business." I clutch the pocket watch tightly, instinctively knowing I must keep it from this man. "I'm documenting the station for the Historical Society. Before demolition." His smile doesn't reach his eyes. "Your permit has been revoked. You need to leave immediately." "Who are you?" I ask, though something in me doesn't want to know the answer. "Edward Blackwood, Eastern Coastal Lines." He extends his hand, and I notice his fingernails are slightly too long, slightly too sharp. "Regional manager." I don't take his hand. Instead, I check my watch again, 5:45. 2 minutes until whatever happens at 5:47. "I was just leaving," I say, backing away. Blackwood's smile widens, revealing teeth that seem too numerous. "Yes, you were. And you won't be coming back." He takes a step toward me, and the air around him ripples like heat waves off hot asphalt. Behind him, I see Frederick watching us, his expression urgent. He points to his wrist, then to the station master's office. The notebook. The evidence. I need to get to it before Blackwood stops me. I turn and run, not toward the exit but deeper into the station, toward the station master's office. Blackwood's shout of anger follows me, accompanied by the sudden shriek of the train whistle from the tunnel. 5:47. The haunting begins. The main concourse is transforming now, decades of decay falling away as the station returns to its 1959 glory. Passengers from other platforms cross my path, not ghosts but solid forms that I have to dodge to avoid collision. I reach the station master's office just as the PA system crackles to life, now approaching Platform 7, the 8:15 overnight service to Boston. The door is locked. I pound on it in frustration, aware of footsteps approaching from behind. Blackwood, coming after me. Then a key turns in the lock from inside, and the door swings open. Walter stands there, but not the Walter I know, a younger version, his uniform crisp, his eyes clear and alert. "Hurry," he says, pulling me inside and locking the door behind us. "You don't have much time." "The desk," I gasp. "Frederick's notebook." "There's a hidden compartment." Walter nods and moves to the desk, his movements deft as he presses something beneath its edge. A small panel slides open in what appeared to be solid wood, revealing a compartment containing a leather-bound notebook. "Been waiting 60 years for someone to find this," Walter says, handing it to me. "Too much of a coward to do it myself." "You knew?" I ask, taking the notebook. "I was the station master that night. I heard Blackwood tell Frederick to take the train out despite the warnings. His eyes are haunted." I said nothing, did nothing, and 47 people died. Outside, Blackwood pounds on the door. The wood splinters but holds. "He's not human," Walter warns. "Not anymore. The company executives who covered up the negligence, they're bound to this place too, but different from the passengers. They feed on the suffering, on the repetition of the tragedy. They gain power from it." Another blow hits the door, the frame cracking. "Take the notebook," Walter urges. Get out. Make it public. It's the only way to end this. I flipped through the pages quickly, detailed logs of maintenance issues with the brakes, dated warnings, signatures of company officials acknowledging the problems and ordering the train to run anyway. The evidence Frederick mentioned, proof of criminal negligence. The door bursts open. Blackwood stands in the threshold, his form distorted now, elongated and shadowy. Behind him, passengers are boarding the train at platform 7. That doesn't belong to you, he snarls, reaching for the notebook. Walter throws himself at Blackwood, buying me seconds. Go, he shouts. Through the back door. I run, clutching the notebook and Frederick's watch, through a door I hadn't noticed before. It leads to a narrow corridor and then stairs up to the station master's tower. I take them two at a time, hearing the inhuman howl of rage from Blackwood below. The tower offers no escape, just a small room with windows on all sides. I'm trapped. Below, I can see platform 7, where the last of the passengers are boarding the train. Frederick stands by the open door of the last car, looking up at the tower. Our eyes meet, and he nods once, a gesture of gratitude or farewell, I'm not sure which. Then his gaze shifts to something behind me, and his expression becomes one of alarm. I turn to find Blackwood standing in the doorway of the tower, his form barely human now, a writhing mass of shadows with glowing eyes and too many teeth. 60 years, he hisses. 60 years of feeding on their terror, their confusion, their endless journey to nowhere. And you think you can end it with a notebook? He lunges for me, clawed hands extended. I dodge, but in this small space there's nowhere to go. His claws catch my shirt, tearing it and grazing the skin beneath. The pain is shocking, not just physical but existential, as if he's tearing at my very being. I cry out, staggering back against the windows. Below, the train whistle blows, final warning before departure. Frederick remains on the platform, watching the tower, waiting. Blackwood advances on me again, his form flickering between human and shadow creature. Give me the notebook. Join us on the train. You can ride with us forever. No, I say, though my voice shakes. This ends tonight. I hold Frederick's watch tightly in one hand, the notebook in the other. The watch pulses with cold energy, synchronizing with my heartbeat. Blackwood reaches for me again, but something stops him, an invisible barrier between us. He snarls in frustration, pressing against it, his form distorting further. The watch, he hisses. Arlo's cursed timepiece. It won't save you. But I can feel that it already is. The cold energy spreads from the watch throughout my body, creating a shield against Blackwood's darkness. In this moment of supernatural conflict, I understand what I must do. I back toward the window overlooking platform 7. Frederick still stands there, the last passenger yet to board. The train whistle sounds again, more urgent. This is for them, I say, clutching the notebook. For the truth. Then I turn and smash the window with my elbow, ignoring the pain as glass shatters around me. I lean out, holding the notebook above the platform. Frederick. I call. Catch. I throw the notebook down to him. He catches it one-handed, clutches it to his chest, and nods to me once more before boarding the train. Blackwood howls with rage and flings himself at me. This time, the watch's protection isn't enough. We collide, tumbling toward the broken window. For a terrifying moment, I think we'll both fall to the platform below. But something catches me, invisible hands, dozens of them, breaking my fall. I hover outside the tower window, suspended in air, as Blackwood claws at me from inside. Below, the train begins to move, pulling away from Platform 7 with Frederick and the Notebook aboard. But instead of heading into the darkness of the tunnel as I expected, the track ahead of it seems to shift, leading not east toward Boston but upward, ascending into a light that wasn't there before. The passengers pressed their faces to the windows, expressions of wonder and recognition replacing their former vacant gazes. They know. Somehow, they finally know that this journey leads not to Boston but to whatever waits beyond this world. Blackwood screams, a sound of loss and fury. His form begins to dissolve, breaking apart like smoke in a strong wind. The other railway executives who covered up the negligence appear on the platform, running after the departing train, their shapes similarly disintegrating. The invisible hands lower me gently to the platform as the last car of the train passes. Standing on solid ground again, I watch as the 8:15 to Boston, 60 years late, finally completes its journey, not to its intended destination, but to the one its passengers have been seeking all along. The light grows brighter as the train ascends, until I have to shield my eyes. When it fades I can see again, the platform is empty. The train is gone. The ghosts are gone. Black River Station stands around me, still decayed, still abandoned, but somehow lighter, as if a great weight has been lifted from it. In my hand, Frederick's watch begins to tick again, steady and strong. The hands, frozen for decades at 8:37, advance slowly clockwise, completing the journey they too were denied. When they reach 12, the watch case springs open one last time. Inside, where the inscription from Elizabeth once was, new words have appeared. Thank you for bringing us home. The watch closes on its own, and warmth returns to the metal. Whatever connection it provided has been severed, its purpose fulfilled. I make my way back to the main concourse, half expecting to find Walter, either the younger version or the old caretaker I first met. But the station is empty, truly empty now, perhaps for the first time in 60 years. Outside, dawn is breaking. I've spent the entire night in Black River Station, though it felt like mere hours. The notebook with its evidence is gone, departed with Frederick on that impossible train. But I don't need it anymore. The truth has been acknowledged, the journey completed. As I leave the station for the last time, I notice something I missed before, a small memorial plaque beside the main entrance, newer than the building itself. It lists the names of the 47 victims of the crash, and below them, added more recently, Frederick Harlow, conductor, who joined his passengers on their final journey, October 18, 2022. Yesterday's date. I touch the plaque gently, feeling the engraved letters beneath my fingertips. Then I place Frederick's watch beside it, a final tribute to the man who waited 60 years to complete his responsibilities, to bring his passengers safely home. The watch gleams in the morning sunlight, then seems to fade, becoming transparent before disappearing entirely. Released, like its owner, from its long vigil at Black River Station. I walk away, knowing I will include none of this in my official report. Some histories aren't meant to be documented but simply witnessed, and some journeys, no matter how delayed, find their way to completion in their own time. What haunts us more, the spirits of the dead, or the weight of the living who remember them? It's been a week since that night at Black River Station. A week since I witnessed the 8:15 to Boston finally complete its 60-year delayed journey. A week of questioning my sanity, my memory, my understanding of reality itself. I submitted my report on the station's architectural features to Thomas, carefully omitting any mention of ghosts, phantom trains, or railway executives who transform into shadow creatures. My documentation was thorough, professional, dispassionate, everything expected of a railway historian. The demolition is scheduled to proceed next month. I should feel closure. The spirits trapped in their endless loop have been released. Frederick Harlow and his passengers have moved on. The evil that fed on their suffering has been defeated. A perfect ending to a ghost story. But something doesn't feel right. Something keeps drawing me back. That's why I'm sitting in the Shady Pines retirement community, waiting to speak with Margaret Harlow, daughter of the conductor whose pocket watch disappeared with the morning light a week ago. The elderly receptionist eyes me suspiciously as I flip through an outdated magazine, pretending to read while my mind races with questions. What does Margaret know about her father's involvement in the crash? Did he ever speak of the haunting? And most importantly, why do I still feel connected to Black River Station even after its ghosts have departed? My thoughts are interrupted by the arrival of a slender woman with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. Despite her 80-plus years, Margaret Harlow carries herself with the straight-back posture of someone much younger. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, fix on me immediately. Mr. Foster? Her voice is clear, with the slight raspiness of age. I understand you want to talk about my father. I stand, extending my hand. Yes, thank you for seeing me, Mrs. Harlow. Miss Harlow, she corrects, her handshake firm. I never married. And it's Margaret, please. Follow me to the garden. We'll have more privacy there. I follow her through the retirement home's common areas to a pleasant courtyard garden where autumn flowers still bloom in protected beds. She settles on a bench and gestures for me to join her. Now, she says without preamble, you're the one who found my father's watch. I try to hide my surprise. How did you know about that? A ghost of a smile crosses her face. You're not the only one who's been in contact with Frederick Harlow's spirit, Mr. Foster. The admission stuns me into momentary silence. I had prepared for skepticism, for having to convince her of the supernatural events I'd witnessed. Not for this matter-of-fact acknowledgement. He spoke to you too? I finally manage. Margaret nods. For decades. Not constantly, but on anniversaries, birthdays, moments when the veil thins, as they say. She studies me intently. What happened at the station? Last week, I felt him leave. After 60 years of his presence at the edges of my awareness, he was simply gone. I tell her everything, finding the watch, the evidence of corporate negligence, Frederick's request for help, and the final journey of the 8:15 train into that mysterious light. She listens without interrupting, her eyes growing distant as she absorbs my story. So they're free, she says when I finish, her voice thick with emotion. All of them. Finally. You don't seem surprised by any of this, I observe. Margaret sighs, looking out across the garden. My father never recovered from the crash. Physically, he healed, though he walked with a limp for the rest of his life. But mentally, emotionally, he was a different man afterward. Haunted, quite literally. She turns back to me. He told me about the notebook, about the warnings he received about the brakes. About how Eastern Coastal Lines pressured him to keep to the schedule despite the risks. He tried to go public with it after the crash, but the company buried the evidence, paid off witnesses, and threatened him with prosecution if he didn't keep quiet. That's why he became a recluse? She nods. He couldn't live with the guilt, couldn't face other people knowing what he'd done and what he'd failed to do. But he also couldn't move on. He was bound to those passengers, to his failure to protect them. I thought the haunting ended when the train finally departed, I say slowly. But there's something still pulling me back to the station. I can feel it even now. Margaret's expression shifts, becomes more guarded. What exactly did you see in the basement? You mentioned a metal door with no handle? The precision of her question catches me off guard. Yes, beneath platform 7. I heard a voice behind it during my first visit. She closes her eyes briefly, as if confirming a fear. The door is still there, then. It hasn't been opened. What door? What's behind it? Margaret's voice lowers. Not what, Mr. Foster? Who? A chill runs through me despite the afternoon sun. There's someone else trapped in the station? Not someone. Something. Her hands, spotted with age but still elegant, twist in her lap. My father didn't tell me everything at once. The truth came in fragments over years. But he spoke of a presence beneath the station, something that existed before the railway was built. Something that the company executives made a pact with. My mouth goes dry. What kind of pact? The kind that ensures business success in exchange for tributes. Her eyes meet mine, conveying the horror her measured words don't fully express. Eastern Coastal Lines didn't just ignore warnings about the brakes. They deliberately sabotaged them. You're saying the crash wasn't negligence but intentional? The idea is almost too monstrous to contemplate. They sacrificed 47 passengers? Sacrificed is precisely the word. Margaret's voice is barely above a whisper now. The being beneath the station feeds on tragedy, on suffering. The executives who made the original pact in the 1880s were granted wealth and power in return for ensuring a steady supply of pain. I think of Blackwood, the railway executive whose form had distorted into that shadow creature. I saw one of them. He tried to stop me from helping Frederick. Edward Blackwood. Margaret speaks the name like a curse. Regional manager in 59, later promoted to vice president. He was the one who ordered my father to take the train out despite the brake issues. The one who threatened him afterward. A realization dawns on me. The executives weren't trapped like the passengers. They were guardians, making sure the 815 kept repeating its journey to nowhere, feeding on the confusion and terror of the passengers. Yes. Margaret nods. And when you helped my father break that cycle, you disrupted their arrangement. But you didn't end it. The thing behind the door, I murmur. It's still there. And hungry, Margaret adds grimly. The crash of 59 was the biggest tribute in the station's history, but there were others before it, smaller accidents, individual tragedies, all arranged by the company executives to feed their benefactor. But the station's been abandoned for years. How could it still be feeding? The repetition of the crash night after night was sustenance enough. Now that's gone. Her eyes bore into mine. Do you understand what I'm telling you, Mr. Foster? It's starving. And the demolition team arrives next month. Horror washes over me as I grasp her meaning. A construction site. Dozens of workers. Accidents happen all the time. It would be a feast, she confirms. And once free of its prison beneath the station, who knows what it might do? I stand, suddenly needing to move, to process this revelation. We have to stop the demolition. And how do you propose to do that? Margaret's tone is gently skeptical. Tell them there's a supernatural entity beneath the station that feeds on human suffering? You'll be dismissed as a crank at best, institutionalized at worst. She's right, of course. I paced the garden path, mind racing. Then we need to deal with the entity directly. Your father must have told you something about it, its nature, its weaknesses. Margaret is silent for a long moment. He did, she finally admits. But what he told me, it's not a solution I'd wish on anyone, least of all someone who's already done so much for my father and those passengers. Tell me, I insist. Please. She studies me, seeming to weigh something in her mind. The being can be bound more securely or banished entirely, but both options require a volunteer. A sacrifice, I translate, my stomach sinking. Not necessarily death, she clarifies quickly. But a binding, yes. Someone to take the place of the executives who originally made the pact to ensure the entity remains contained. And banishment? Requires someone to enter its domain, to face it directly. Her voice wavers. My father considered it many times, but he couldn't bring himself to go through that door. He was too afraid of what he'd find on the other side. I think of the metal door with no handle, of the whispered voice behind it, of the cold dread I felt in its presence. The idea of deliberately seeking it out makes my blood run cold. Is there a third option? I ask, already knowing the answer. Margaret shakes her head. Not according to my father. The entity has been feeding too long, growing too powerful. If it's not bound or banished before the demolition. She doesn't need to finish the thought. We both understand the consequences. I'll do it, I hear myself say, the words emerging before I've fully processed their implications. Margaret looks stricken. Mr. Foster, you don't understand what you're volunteering for. Daniel, I correct her. And you're right, I don't fully understand. But I'm connected to this now. I can feel it. I touch my chest where the watch had rested against my skin. Frederick chose me for a reason. He knew I could help the passengers. Maybe he knew I could help with this too. She reaches out, her cool fingers wrapping around my wrist. Then you need to know everything. The full truth about the entity, about what binding or banishment would mean for you. For the next hour, as the garden's shadows lengthen with the setting sun, Margaret tells me what her father shared with her over the decades, the ancient nature of the being beneath the station, its hunger for human suffering, the ritual that would be required to face it. Each detail more disturbing than the last. The entity predates the railway, predates the town itself, she explains. The indigenous people of this region had legends about a hollow in the earth where misfortune dwelled. They avoided the area completely. But the railway builders didn't know or didn't care, I guess. Worse, Margaret says grimly. They knew. The original survey team experienced phenomena. 3 men disappeared. But the route was too profitable to abandon, so they consulted a man versed in certain dark practices. And made their pact, I finish. Margaret nods. A bargain that guaranteed the railway's success in exchange for feeding the entity. Small tragedies at first, a worker falling from scaffolding, a passenger losing a child. But as the years passed, it required more. Until the crash of '59. The largest feeding in its history, she confirms. After which the executives thought they could control it indefinitely through the loop of suffering they created. Night has fallen by the time Margaret finishes explaining what I'll need to do. The path ahead is clear but terrifying. I thank her, promise to be careful, and leave with the weight of her knowledge pressing down on me. 3 days later, I return to Black River Station for what I hope will be the final time. The building seems to sense my intentions. The air is heavier than before, thicker somehow, as if the station itself is trying to make it difficult for me to breathe. Each step deeper into its halls requires more effort than the last. I've come prepared this time, not just with the items Margaret told me I would need, but with knowledge. I spent the intervening days researching the history of Eastern coastal lines, confirming through newspaper archives what Margaret had told me. The pattern of accidents throughout the company's history was too consistent to be coincidence once you knew what to look for. The station is eerily silent as I make my way toward Platform 7. No ghostly passengers tonight, no phantom train whistles, but the absence doesn't feel peaceful. It feels expectant, like the hushed moment before lightning strikes. I descend the maintenance stairs to the basement beneath Platform 7, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The metal door with no handle waits for me, exactly as I remember it. But tonight, something has changed. A thin line of reddish light outlines its frame, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. It knows you're coming, Margaret had warned. It will try to frighten you away, and failing that, it will try to seduce you into making your own pact. I set down my backpack and remove the items I'll need: 7 black candles, which I arrange in a semicircle facing the door, a small bronze bowl, a mixture of herbs and salts that Margaret prepared, a knife with an antler handle, old and worn, and finally, the item that had been hardest to obtain, a railway spike from the original Eastern coastal track, corroded with age and mysteriously warm to the touch. As I arrange these items according to Margaret's instructions, the light around the door intensifies, and a low humming begins, more felt than heard. I forced myself to continue despite the dread building in my chest. The binding requires blood freely given, Margaret had explained. But the banishment requires more: a confrontation, a rejection of what it offers, and a sacrifice of something precious to you. I complete the preparations, then take the knife and draw it across my palm, allowing blood to drip into the bronze bowl where it mingles with the herbs and salts. The mixture hisses and gives off a pale blue smoke that smells of ozone and winter frost. I seek audience. I speak the words Margaret taught me. I come to end what was begun. The humming grows louder. The red light around the door flares brightly, then dims to a steady glow. And then, with a sound like a sigh, the door that had no handle swings slowly open. Beyond it is not the brick wall or maintenance room I might have expected, but a staircase descending into darkness. The steps are worn stone, ancient looking, far older than the station itself. Red light emanates from somewhere far below, casting grotesque shadows that seem to move independent of any source. I take a deep breath, collect the railway spike and the bowl of mixed blood, and step through the doorway. The air changes immediately, colder, denser, with an unpleasant metallic taste. The door swings shut behind me with a finality that makes my heart race. There is only forward now, only down. I begin to descend, counting the steps as a way to maintain my composure. At 27, the staircase makes a turn. At 53, another. By the 100th step, the walls around me have changed from the expected brick and concrete to something that looks like natural stone but feels wrong beneath my fingers, slightly yielding, almost organic. The humming has become a rhythmic pulse that matches my heartbeat exactly. The red light grows stronger, and with it comes a smell, copper and rot and something sweeter underneath, sickeningly so. At step 147, I reach the bottom. The staircase opens into a vast chamber that defies the geography I know exists above. It should be impossible for this space to exist beneath Black River Station, yet here it is, a cathedral-like cavern with walls that glisten wetly in the red light. And in the center, floating a few feet above the ground, is the source of the light, a swirling mass of crimson energy roughly the size of a car, pulsing with that same heartbeat rhythm. It has no definite shape, its edges constantly flowing and reforming, but as I watch, it begins to coalesce into something almost human. Daniel Foster, it speaks, its voice the same whisper I heard behind the door, but amplified now, coming from everywhere at once. You have been expected. I clutched the railway spike tightly, feeling its warmth intensify. You know why I'm here. The entity continues to shift, taking on different forms, now almost human, now something insectoid, now a churning mass of what looked disturbingly like faces in agony. To make a pact, it says, its voice smoother now, almost pleasant, as others before you have done. Smart. Very smart. No, I say firmly. To end the pacts. All of them. A sound like laughter fills the chamber, echoing off the walls. So righteous. So determined. Just like Frederick in the beginning. The mention of Frederick makes my resolve waver momentarily. What do you mean, in the beginning? Before the crash. Before his conscience overcame his ambition. The entity's form shifts again, stabilizing into something that resembles a man in a railway executive suit from a century ago. He came to me seeking advancement. Safety for his family during difficult times. I granted his wishes. Until you demanded the crash in return, I say, anger replacing my fear. A fair exchange. The entity's human-like face smiles, revealing too many teeth. But Frederick lost his nerve. Tried to stop the train despite our arrangement. That's why he was punished, trapped with the others all these years. I feel sick at this revelation but push aside my disgust. I need to stay focused. And now you're hungry again, I say. Planning to feast when the demolition team arrives. Smart boy, it purrs. But it doesn't have to be that way. I can offer you so much more than Frederick ever received. Knowledge. Power. Insights into mysteries beyond human understanding. As it speaks, images flood my mind, glimpses of impossible wonders, secrets of the universe, capabilities I never imagined. For a moment, I'm overwhelmed by the possibilities. All I require, the entity continues, its voice hypnotic, is your service. Bring me what I need, and the rewards will be beyond your comprehension. I feel myself swaying, tempted despite everything Margaret warned me about. The entity's form becomes more appealing, more human, radiating a charisma that pulls at something deep within me. What would you have me do? I ask, stalling for time as I try to clear my head. The entity's smile widens. So simple. Postpone the demolition. Find another site for study. Then, when the time is right, a small accident. Nothing too dramatic, a worker falling, perhaps. A life given so that many might benefit from what I can share with you. It glides closer, reaching out with a hand that appears human but moves too fluidly. Think of the historical discoveries you could make with my guidance. The advancements in understanding. One small sacrifice for knowledge that would make your career, your reputation. The temptation is real. I can feel it working on me, reshaping my thoughts, finding the cracks in my morality. This is how it happened. I realize how ordinary men became monsters over time, how small compromises led to 47 deaths. I grip the railway spike tighter, feeling its heat burning against my palm. No, I say, the word carrying more power than I expected. No more sacrifices. No more suffering. The entity's pleasant demeanor vanishes instantly. Its form distorts, expanding to fill more of the chamber, the red light pulsing faster, angrier. Then you will take their place, it hisses. Your suffering will feed me for years. Tendrils of crimson energy lash out, wrapping around my arms and legs. Pain sears through me, not just physical but emotional, existential. Every loss I've ever experienced, every fear, every moment of despair amplified 1,000-fold. I cry out, nearly dropping the railway spike as the agony threatens to overwhelm me. But through the pain, I remember Margaret's instructions. When it attacks, that's when it's most vulnerable. That's when you drive the spike into the heart of its power. Summoning every ounce of all I possess, I lunge forward, thrusting the railway spike toward the center of the swirling red mass. The entity shrieks, a sound that threatens to rupture my eardrums and intensifies its assault. The pain redoubles, and with it come visions, my parents dying in agony, friends betraying me, a lifetime of isolation and misery. False memories, I tell myself, even as they feel horrifically real. You're not real. I shout, pushing forward despite the pain. You feed on fear and pain, but you create nothing. You are nothing but a parasite. The spike makes contact with the entity's core. There's a moment of tremendous resistance, then a sensation like breaking through ice. The spike plunges into the heart of the crimson energy, and the effect is immediate and catastrophic. The entity's shriek becomes a howl of genuine agony. The red light flares blindingly bright, then begins to fracture, cracks of darkness spreading through its form like a breaking mirror. The tendrils gripping me dissolve, the pain receding. What have you done? It wails, its voice distorting, fragmenting. Ended it, I say, watching as the cracks spread further. No more pacts. No more sacrifices. The entity makes one final, desperate attempt to reconstitute itself. For a moment, it takes the form of Edward Blackwood again, reaching out to me with an expression of terror. Please, it begs in Blackwood's voice. We can negotiate. Anything you want. I want you gone, I reply simply. The cracks reach critical mass. The entity shatters like glass, fragments of red energy exploding outward before imploding back in on themselves. There's a sound like reality itself tearing, a flash of light that forces me to close my eyes, and then silence. When I open my eyes, the cavern has changed. The wet, organic walls have turned to ordinary stone. The red light is gone, replaced by a dim, natural phosphorescence. And where the entity had been, there is nothing but a small crater in the floor, at the center of which lies the railway spike, now blackened and twisted as if subjected to impossible heat. I stand there for a long moment, waiting for something else to happen, some final attack or revelation. But there is only silence and the sense of an ancient malevolence finally vanquished. The journey back up the stairs is arduous. My body aches from the entity's assault, and the staircase seems to have doubled in length. But eventually, I reach the metal door, which now hangs slightly ajar, revealing the basement of Black River Station beyond. As I step through, the door swings shut behind me with a definitive click. When I turn back, it's gone, not concealed or hidden, but simply no longer there. The wall is blank concrete, with no indication a door ever existed. I make my way back through the station, each step feeling lighter than the last. The oppressive atmosphere has lifted, replaced by the ordinary emptiness of an abandoned building. No ghosts, no whispers, no unnatural cold, just an old railway station waiting for its appointment with the wrecking ball. Outside, dawn is breaking again, just as it did after the night the train departed. I sit on the station steps, watching the sun rise over the town of Black River, feeling both victorious and strangely hollow. It's over, yet I'm left with questions that will never be answered, experiences I can never share. 2 weeks later, I stand across the street from Black River Station, watching as the demolition crew sets up their equipment. Thomas stands beside me, clipboard in hand, oblivious to the true history of the building we're about to lose. "Shame we couldn't save it," he remarks. "But your documentation was impeccable. At least the Historical Society will have a complete record." "Not complete, I think, but don't say. No record will ever mention Frederick Harlow's watch, or the entity beneath Platform 7, or the night the 8:15 to Boston finally completed its journey." As the wrecking ball takes its first swing at the station's facade, I feel a momentary pang of worry. What if some trace of the entity remains? What if destruction unleashes something we failed to fully banish? But as bricks crumble and dust rises, there is nothing supernatural, nothing ominous, just the ordinary end of an old building. Whatever darkness dwelled there is truly gone. That evening, I make one final visit to Shady Pines to tell Margaret what happened. She listens intently, her eyes filling with tears when I describe the entity's defeat and the disappearance of the door. "My father would be proud," she says when I finish. "He carried that burden for so long, trying to make amends in the only way he could." "Did he know?" I ask. "About the entity claiming he made a pact with it?" Margaret's expression darkens. It was a half-truth at best. "My father did approach the railway executives when times were hard, seeking advancement. They introduced him to their benefactor, but he refused the terms. That's why they set him up to take the blame for the crash, punishment for his rejection of their arrangement. It makes sense, the entity twisting facts to undermine my resolve, using Frederick's guilt against me." "What will you do now?" Margaret asks. It's a question I've been asking myself since that night beneath the station. My life as a railway historian seems suddenly mundane, disconnected from the greater mysteries I've glimpsed. "Continue my work," I answer after a moment. "But perhaps with a different focus. There must be other places like Black River Station, other hidden histories waiting to be uncovered." Margaret studies me, her expression thoughtful. "You've been changed by this experience. Marked by it." I nod, unable to deny it. Since that night, I've found myself more sensitive to the unseen, atmospheres in old buildings, whispers just at the edge of hearing, the weight of history pressing down in places where tragedy has occurred. "My father left me several items," Margaret says carefully. "Journals. Correspondence with others who encountered similar phenomena. They might help you in whatever comes next." I accept her offer, though part of me wants to walk away, to return to the comfortable world of documented history and verifiable facts. But I know that's no longer possible. Once you've seen behind the veil, you can never fully unsee it. A month later, I submit my final report on Black River Station. The building is gone now, reduced to rubble and cleared away, the land awaiting redevelopment. Thomas is pleased with my work, unaware that the most significant discoveries never made it into my documentation. In my apartment, Margaret's father's journals occupy a growing section of my bookshelf, alongside texts on folklore, paranormal phenomena, and the hidden histories of America's railways. A new direction for my research, albeit one I can rarely discuss with colleagues. Sometimes, late at night, I take out the photograph I kept from that final morning, the memorial plaque with the victims' names, Frederick Harlow's name newly added at the bottom. The only tangible evidence that any of it happened at all. I've had dreams since Black River, dreams of a train journey through darkness toward an impossibly bright light. Dreams where Frederick stands at the door of the last car, holding it open, watching as I run to catch up. Dreams where passengers press their faces to windows, mouthing words I can never quite make out. I don't believe they're messages or visitations. Just my mind processing what I experienced, giving shape to the inexplicable. But I take comfort in them nonetheless, in the image of that train finally reaching its destination, its passengers at peace. What haunts us more, the spirits of the dead, or the weight of the living who remember them? Perhaps it's neither. Perhaps what truly haunts us are the choices we make when confronted with darkness, whether we succumb to it, flee from it, or stand against it, whatever the cost. As for me, I've made my choice. There are other stations waiting, other histories to uncover, both those that can be documented in official reports, and those that can only be witnessed, experienced, and remembered. And somewhere, on a track that exists beyond ordinary reality, the 8:15 to Boston continues its journey into light. Have you ever felt like a city was watching you? The train pulled into Greywood Station just after midnight, the screech of metal against metal piercing the unusual silence. I stepped onto the platform, my footsteps echoing against the worn marble floor. The station was nearly deserted, a lone janitor mopping the floor at the far end, and an elderly ticket collector whose eyes never quite met mine when I handed him my ticket. "First time in Greywood?" he asked, his voice like gravel. "Yes," I replied, adjusting my backpack. "I'm here to research local architecture for my dissertation." "Interesting choice," he mumbled, handing back my ticket stub. His fingers were ice cold against mine. "Not many people come to study Greywood anymore." "That's precisely why I'm here," I said with a smile that wasn't returned. "Less documented, more discoveries." The man's weathered face creased further. "Just remember, Marcus. Some things stay undocumented for a reason." I froze. "How did you know my name?" He blinked slowly, confusion crossing his features. "You told me when you arrived, didn't you?" I hadn't. I was certain of that. Outside the station, Greywood unfurled before me like a tattered map. Gothic spires and modernist glass structures stood side by side, an architectural contradiction that somehow worked in the amber glow of street lamps. The air felt heavier here, carrying a metallic scent I couldn't place. My hotel was supposedly a 15-minute walk from the station. I checked the directions on my phone, but the signal kept cutting out, the map reloading in fragments. Eventually, I gave up and relied on the printed directions I thankfully brought as backup. The streets were oddly confusing, avenues that should have been straight seemed to curve when I wasn't paying attention. Street signs appeared to be in different positions when I looked back at them. Twice I found myself returning to the same intersection despite walking in what I was sure was a straight line. "Are you lost?" The voice came from behind me, and I turned to find a woman standing there. She was about my age, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, dressed in jeans and a gray sweater that seemed to absorb the streetlight rather than reflect it. "A bit," I admitted. "I'm trying to find the Monarch Hotel on Kingsley Avenue." "You're headed the wrong way," she said, pointing in the opposite direction. "This city, it doesn't always make sense to newcomers." "I'm Eleanor, by the way." "Marcus," I replied, extending my hand. When she shook it, I noticed her hand was unusually warm against the chilly night air. "You live here?" "All my life," she said with a slight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The Monarch's not far. I can walk you there." As we walked, I noticed how the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long behind us. The streetlights buzzed intermittently, some flickering in patterns that almost seemed deliberate. I tried to focus on conversation instead of the growing unease in my stomach. So what brings you to our forgotten little corner of the world? Eleanor asked. Architectural research. Graywood has some unique features, buildings that don't follow traditional progression of styles. It's almost as if time developed differently here. Eleanor's stride faltered for just a moment. That's perceptive of you. Most visitors don't notice that right away. It's my field, I explained. But there's not much written about Graywood. Almost like it's been deliberately overlooked. Maybe it wanted to be overlooked, she murmured, so quietly I almost missed it. We turned a corner, and suddenly the street opened up to a small square dominated by an imposing building with Art Deco features. The Monarch Hotel. It hadn't appeared this abruptly on the map. Here we are, Eleanor said. The Monarch. One of our more consistent buildings. Consistent? It stays where it's supposed to. She smiled again, this time with something like genuine amusement. A rare quality in Graywood. As I thanked her, a cold breeze swept through the square, carrying scattered leaves and what sounded like distant whispers. The ornate clock above the hotel entrance read 3:25, far later than it should have been. My journey from the station couldn't have taken more than 30 minutes. My watch must be wrong, I said, checking it against the clock. My watch read 1:17. Time is fluid here, Eleanor said, stepping back. You learn that quickly enough. The official town motto is Tempus Nemine Mene, time waits for no one. But locals know the truth. In Graywood, time doesn't just wait, it watches. She turned to leave, her silhouette blending too quickly with the darkness between streetlights. Wait, I called after her. How will I find you again? If I have questions about the town? Her voice drifted back without her turning around. Don't worry, Marcus. In Graywood, finding isn't the problem. It's what finds you that you should worry about. I stood there for a moment, listening to her footsteps fade too rapidly. When I turned back to the hotel, I could have sworn the facade had changed slightly, the windows positioned differently, the entrance door narrower than it had appeared moments before. Inside, the lobby was all burgundy carpets and mahogany paneling. A chandelier hung from the ceiling, casting prismatic shadows across the walls. At the front desk, a clerk in a perfectly pressed uniform greeted me with a practiced smile. Ah, Mr. Willis. We've been expecting you. I didn't remember giving them my last name when I made the reservation online. Your room is ready, but we were beginning to worry. Most guests don't wander the streets after midnight. Not on their first night, at least. As he handed me the key, an actual metal key, not a key card, I noticed a small framed photograph on the desk. It showed the hotel, but with subtle differences. And standing in front of it was a woman who looked remarkably like Eleanor. Is this a historical photo? I asked. The clerk glanced at it, his expression unreadable. In a manner of speaking, that was taken in 1947 during the hotel's renovation. I leaned closer. The woman in the photo wore different clothes, but her face, her posture, it was unmistakably Eleanor. The woman looks like someone I just met, I said. The clerk's smile tightened. Impossible, sir. That's Eleanor Blackwell, the architect who redesigned this building. She disappeared shortly after the photograph was taken. Never seen again. My mouth went dry. There must be a resemblance, then. Perhaps, he conceded. Though resemblance is often the first sign that Graywood has taken an interest in you. Sleep well, Mr. Willis. And perhaps, don't look out your window tonight, no matter what you might hear calling your name. In my room, I tried to dismiss his warning as local color, something to unnerve tourists. But as I unpacked, I couldn't help noticing how the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. The radiator clicked and hissed in patterns too regular to be random. And when I finally lay down to sleep, the ceiling above me seemed to be breathing, expanding and contracting in imperceptible movements that became obvious once you noticed them. Just as I was drifting off, I heard it, a soft tapping at my window. 3 taps, pause. 3 taps, pause. My room was on the 5th floor. The tapping continued, becoming more insistent. Against my better judgment, I rose and approached the window. The curtains were drawn, heavy velvet between me and whatever waited outside. "Marcus," a voice whispered, not Eleanor's voice, but something older, something that seemed to flow through the walls themselves. "Marcus, we've been waiting so long for you to come home." I reached for the curtain, my hand trembling. "Show us you remember," the voice urged. "Show us you're ready to see." My fingers touched the velvet fabric, and outside, the tapping stopped abruptly. In that sudden silence, I heard the clerk's warning echo in my mind. With a shudder, I withdrew my hand and backed away from the window. That night, I dreamed of streets that rearranged themselves, of buildings that breathed, and of Eleanor standing at crossroads that existed in different times at once, beckoning me deeper into the labyrinth of Greywood, a city that seemed to have expected my arrival for a very long time. Morning broke with a thin, gray light that seemed reluctant to enter my room. I woke feeling like I hadn't slept at all, my dreams of shifting streets and Eleanor's beckoning figure still vivid in my mind. The tapping at my window had ceased, but when I finally mustered the courage to draw back the curtains, I found strange markings on the glass, faint, spiral patterns like fingertips had traced them from the outside. The hotel room looked subtly different in daylight. The walls seemed closer than they had the night before, the ceiling lower. I measured the room with my footsteps, 12 paces long and 8 wide. I could have sworn it was larger when I checked in. Breakfast was served in a grand dining room with high ceilings and ornate moldings. Only 3 other tables were occupied, an elderly couple who never looked up from their plates, a businesswoman furiously typing on her laptop, and a middle-aged man in tweed who kept glancing at me. As I finished my coffee, the man approached my table. "You must be the architecture student," he said, extending his hand. "Richard Mercer, local historian. The front desk mentioned your research interests." I shook his hand, noting how his fingers twitched slightly against mine. "Marcus Willis." "I'm surprised the clerk remembered why I'm here." "Oh, the Monarch staff remember everything," Mercer said with a thin smile. "It's their way. I thought perhaps I could offer you some guidance. Greywood's architectural history is complex." "I'd appreciate that," I said. I noticed some unusual juxtapositions even on my walk from the station. Mercer leaned forward. "This town doesn't follow conventional development patterns. Buildings that should have been torn down a century ago stand beside modern constructions, sometimes even intersecting in ways that defy structural logic." "That's exactly what I'm here to study," I said, excitement momentarily overriding my unease. "Could you recommend some starting points?" "The old library on Thornfield Road would be ideal. It contains the only comprehensive records of the city's development." He hesitated. "Though I should warn you, some of our historic sites are temperamental." "Temperamental?" "They don't always welcome visitors. Or rather, they welcome some more than others." He pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook and wrote something down. "Here's the address." and my number, should you require assistance. I glanced at the paper he handed me. The handwriting seemed to shift slightly as I read it, the curves of letters straightening and then curving again. One more thing, Mercer added, lowering his voice. If you meet anyone who seems too familiar with you, someone who knows things they shouldn't, be careful. Graywood has its own representatives. Like Eleanor? The name slipped out before I could stop myself. Mercer's face drained of color. You've met someone by that name? Last night. She helped me find the hotel when I got lost. His hand trembled as he picked up his teacup. There hasn't been an Eleanor in Graywood since 1947. At least, not one who interacts with visitors. Before I could respond, a loud crash came from the kitchen, followed by the sound of breaking glass. The noise seemed to snap Mercer out of his trance. I should go, he said abruptly. If you value your sanity, Mr. Willis, stick to public places and daylight hours. And if Eleanor finds you again, he hesitated. Ask her about the clock tower. Her reaction will tell you what you're dealing with. He left quickly, nearly colliding with a waiter at the dining room entrance. Outside the hotel, the day was overcast and unusually quiet for a city center. I oriented myself using the map Mercer had marked with the library's location. The street layout seemed more logical in daylight, though I still had the unsettling feeling that buildings weren't quite where they had been when I passed them. The old library was a Victorian Gothic structure with weathered stone gargoyles guarding its entrance. As I approached, I noticed that while the surrounding buildings cast shadows in the direction of the weak morning sun, the library's shadow stretched in the opposite direction. Inside, the space opened into a cavernous reading room filled with towering bookshelves. The ceiling arched so high above that its details were lost in shadow. A single librarian sat at the central desk, a woman with silver-streaked hair pinned severely back, glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice echoing more than it should have in the space. "I'm researching Graywood's architecture," I explained. "Richard Mercer suggested you might have historical records." At the mention of Mercer, her expression tightened. "The local records are in the West Wing. Though I'm afraid Mr. Mercer hasn't visited this library in quite some time. I just spoke with him this morning." She removed her glasses, polishing them slowly. "How curious. Richard Mercer died 3 years ago." My stomach dropped. "That's impossible. He was just..." "Many things are possible in Graywood that aren't elsewhere," she interrupted. "The West Wing is through that archway. You'll find city maps dating back to the founding. If you need assistance, ring the bell at the desk there. I wouldn't wander among the stacks without purpose. Some visitors have found it disorienting." The West Wing was significantly darker than the main room, illuminated only by green-shaded reading lamps spaced along massive oak tables. The bookshelves here reached all the way to the ceiling, accessible by rolling ladders that seemed to move occasionally of their own accord. I found the map collection easily enough, large drawers filled with documents of various ages. As I spread out the oldest map, dated 1874, I noticed something odd. The street layout was completely different from the modern city, yet somehow familiar. It matched exactly what I had experienced walking from the station last night. I pulled out maps from different decades, 1912, 1943, 2001. Each showed a completely different street arrangement, as if the city had been entirely redesigned multiple times. Yet elements from each appeared in the current city. Fascinating, isn't it? I jerked my head up. Eleanor stood across the table, her fingers resting lightly on the maps. "How did you get here?" I asked, my heart pounding. I've always been here, she replied simply. Finding anything interesting? Her casual presence after Mercer's warning and the librarian's statement sent cold fear trickling down my spine. According to these maps, Greywood's layout has completely transformed at least 5 times in the past century. Not transformed, Eleanor corrected. Accumulated. In Greywood, nothing truly disappears. The city simply layers itself. That's architecturally impossible, I said. Eleanor smiled. Yet here we are. Have you visited the clock tower yet? The question sent a jolt through me, Mercer's test. No, I said carefully. Should I? Her expression remained unchanged, but something flickered in her eyes. It's the geometric center of the original city design. Every iteration of Greywood has maintained it as an anchor point. Will you show me? I asked, watching her closely. I can't, she said, and for a moment, genuine sadness crossed her face. The tower exists at a junction I can't cross anymore. Before I could ask what she meant, the lights in the west wing flickered. When they stabilized, Eleanor was gone, leaving only a slight indentation where her hands had pressed against the maps. I studied the documents more intently now, searching for this clock tower. It appeared in every map, though its surroundings changed dramatically. In the most recent map, from 2012, the tower stood in what appeared to be a circular plaza, surrounded by buildings of various architectural styles. The maps gave me a sense of direction, but as I tried to note specific routes, I noticed something unsettling. The ink on the paper was moving. Street names shifted position slightly, buildings adjusted their footprints. The maps were changing as I watched them. A soft bell chimed somewhere in the stacks behind me, once, twice, 3 times. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. When it stopped, the library had fallen into absolute silence. Even the subtle sounds of the building, the creaking of old wood, the whisper of air through vents, had ceased. I looked up from the maps to find the west wing transformed. The bookshelves now stretched infinitely in all directions, the ceiling and distant walls no longer visible. The only illumination came from my reading lamp, creating a small circle of light in what now seemed like an endless labyrinth of books. Panic rose in my throat as I realized I could no longer see the archway I'd entered through. Every direction looked identical, towering shelves filled with ancient tomes, disappearing into darkness. Hello? I called out, my voice swallowed by the endless rows of books. No answer came. I hastily gathered the maps, folding them into my bag. Whatever was happening, I didn't want to be left without reference points. As I stepped away from the table, my reading lamp went out, plunging me into darkness. A faint blue glow emanated from somewhere deep in the stacks. Without better options, I moved toward it, one hand trailing along the bookshelves to maintain orientation. The shelves felt wrong under my fingers, the wood pulsed slightly, warm like skin. The blue light grew stronger as I approached, revealing its source, a book, pulled partially out from its shelf, emanating an unearthly glow. Its spine read architectural anomalies of Greywood, the spaces between. As I reached for it, whispers erupted from the surrounding shelves, hundreds of voices speaking simultaneously in languages I both recognized and didn't. The cacophony grew louder as my fingers touched the glowing book. The moment I pulled it free, the whispering stopped. The blue glow intensified, illuminating my surroundings, but I was no longer in the library. I stood in the middle of a circular plaza, facing an enormous clock tower that stretched impossibly high into the night sky. The architecture around me was a chaotic blend of every style I'd seen on the maps, buildings from different eras standing side by side, some even melding into one another at impossible angles. The clock on the tower read 3:25, the same time I'd seen on the hotel clock last night, despite the fact that it had been morning when I entered the library. "You found your way here after all," said Eleanor, now standing beside me. "Most researchers don't make it this far. What is this place?" I managed to ask, my voice barely audible over the thundering of my heart. "The heart of Greywood," she replied, "where all versions of the city converge. Look around you, Marcus. Every building you see exists in a different time, a different iteration of Greywood. Yet here, they all exist simultaneously." I turned slowly, taking in the impossible architecture. Buildings stood at angles that defied physics, materials blending into one another where different eras met. Windows showed different weather conditions, different times of day. "This can't be real," I whispered. "Reality is more flexible here than elsewhere," Eleanor said. She pointed to the book still clutched in my hands. "That was my research before I discovered the truth. I was like you once, fascinated by the architectural impossibilities of this place." The cover of the book bore the name Eleanor Blackwell, Ph.D. "You're her," I said. "The architect who disappeared in 1947. She nodded. "I didn't disappear, Marcus. I transcended. I became part of Greywood's architecture, its living history." As she spoke, I noticed with horror that her form was becoming translucent, the buildings behind her visible through her body. More disturbingly, I could see elements of the surrounding architecture beginning to merge with her, brick patterns appearing on her skin, her hair taking on the texture of wrought iron. "What's happening to you?" I asked, backing away. "The same thing that happens to anyone who stays too long in the spaces between," she said, her voice now echoing metallically. "We become part of the city's fabric. Its memory. Its consciousness." The ground beneath my feet began to shift, cobblestones flowing like water. Buildings around the plaza started to move, rotating slightly, closing in. The clock tower's hands began to spin backward rapidly. "You should leave," Eleanor said, now barely recognizable as human. "You're not ready to join us yet." "Ow!" I cried, desperately looking for an exit as the plaza continued to contract around me. "You already have the key," she said, nodding toward the book. Understanding flashed through me. I opened the book, finding the pages blank except for a single line of text that appeared as I watched. "To exit the confluence, one must reject the impossible architecture." I closed my eyes, focusing on what I knew to be architecturally sound, physically possible. I pictured the library as it should be: reasonable dimensions, proper structural support, normal shadows. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the West Wing, standing exactly where I'd been when the lights flickered. The book was gone from my hands, but my bag still contained the maps I collected. The librarian appeared from between the stacks, looking concerned. "Are you all right? You've been standing there motionless for nearly 20 minutes. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just lost in thought about these maps." "Find anything interesting?" she asked. "The clock tower," I said. "Could you tell me how to get there?" Her expression darkened. "I wouldn't recommend visiting that site. There was a structural collapse in 1947. Nothing remains but ruins cordoned off for safety." "The same year Eleanor Blackwell disappeared," I noted. The librarian's face remained carefully blank. "If you're determined to see it, take Marlowe Street East until you reach the circular plaza. But don't stay after dark. The ruins are unstable. As I left the library, the sun was already low in the sky, casting long shadows across the street. The buildings seemed to lean slightly toward me as I passed, windows reflecting impossible angles. I checked my watch, 3:25, again. Either my watch had stopped, or time in Greywood moved according to its own rules. Either way, I needed to find the clock tower before darkness fell completely, before the city's architecture could fully embrace me as it had Eleanor. The maps in my bag felt heavier than they should, and occasionally I could hear them rustling, as if the streets they depicted were still rearranging themselves, preparing for my arrival at the heart of this impossible city. Following the librarian's directions, I made my way down Marlow Street, which curved and twisted far more than any straight urban thoroughfare should. The buildings lining the street represented a chaotic timeline of architectural styles: Victorian townhouses nestled against brutalist concrete structures, Art Nouveau facades flowing into sleek glass postmodernism. Most disturbing was how these styles sometimes blended at their junctions, creating impossible transitions where brick melted into steel, where Gothic spires twisted into contemporary minimalism. The deeper I ventured into Greywood, the more I noticed people watching me from windows and doorways, figures who stood too still, whose eyes followed me with mechanical precision. When I tried to approach one, a man in outdated clothing standing motionless at a shop doorway, he simply faded backward into the shadows of the store, though the shop itself appeared to be abandoned. My phone had stopped working entirely. The screen showed only a swirling pattern that resembled the street layouts I'd seen on the shifting maps. My watch remained frozen at 3:25, though the quality of light suggested late afternoon. The circular plaza appeared suddenly, as if the city had rearranged itself to deliver me there. Where the maps had shown a grand clock tower, there now stood a twisted ruin, a spiraling structure of broken stone and warped metal that still somehow stretched improbably high. Parts of it seemed to flicker between states of decay and perfection, as if the tower existed in multiple time periods simultaneously. Yellow caution tape surrounded the base, along with a weathered sign, "Danger, Structural Collapse." Site of the Blackwell Incident, 1947. As I approached the perimeter, a security guard stepped out from behind the ruins. Unlike the other figures I'd encountered, he moved naturally, his expression alert and suspicious. "This area is closed to the public," he called out, one hand resting on his belt. "Historical preservation site." I held up my university ID. "I'm conducting architectural research. Just need to take a few photos and measurements from a safe distance." He studied my ID with unusual intensity. "Willis, huh? Any relation to Thomas Willis, the urban planner?" The question caught me off guard. Thomas Willis was my grandfather, though he died before I was born. I'd never mentioned him to anyone in Greywood. "He was my grandfather," I admitted cautiously. The guard's demeanor shifted instantly. "Then you're expected." He lifted the caution tape. "Don't stray from the marked path. Some sections are temporally unstable." "Temporally unstable?" I repeated. "Figure of speech," he replied unconvincingly. "Old structures, different pressures on the foundation. Creates unusual effects." The path leading to the tower base was delineated by faded white lines that seemed to glow faintly in the waning light. As I followed them, I experienced brief moments of disorientation, seconds where my surroundings appeared to shift, showing the tower in various states of completion and decay. At the base of the structure, a door stood half hidden among the rubble, a heavy wooden door with an ornate clock face carved into its surface. The hands on this miniature clock were positioned at 3:25. I reached for the tarnished brass handle, and as my fingers made contact, a voice spoke directly behind me. I was beginning to think you'd never arrive. I turned to find a man in an old-fashioned suit, his features strikingly familiar though I couldn't place them. He held a pocket watch in one gloved hand, its chain disappearing into his vest pocket. "Who are you?" I asked. "Thomas Willis," he replied, snapping the watch closed. "Though you'd know me better as your grandfather." My breath caught. The man before me resembled old photographs I'd seen, but he couldn't be more than 40 decades younger than my grandfather would have been when he died. "That's impossible," I said. "My grandfather died 20 years ago." "Death is rather more complicated in Greywood," he said with a sad smile. "As is time. I've been waiting for you here since 1947. "Waiting for me?" "Why?" "Because I made a terrible mistake," he said, gesturing to the ruined tower. "I worked with Eleanor Blackwell on what we believed would be Greywood's architectural masterpiece, a clock tower that would serve as the perfect center point for urban development. What we didn't understand was that Greywood was already sentient in its way, already had its own ideas about urban planning." He moved toward the door, placing his hand beside mine on the handle. When we activated the mechanism inside, it created a temporal fracture. Eleanor was consumed immediately. I escaped physically, but part of me, my consciousness, perhaps my soul, remained trapped here, bound to the clockwork. "What does this have to do with me?" I asked, though a horrible suspicion was forming. "The city has been calling to our bloodline ever since," he said. "Didn't you wonder why you became so obsessed with Greywood's architecture? Why you felt compelled to come here despite the lack of academic resources? The city wanted you here. It's been reshaping itself for decades, preparing for your arrival." The door beneath our hands began to warm, the carved clock face starting to rotate slowly. "I don't understand what you want from me," I said, trying to pull away, but my hand seemed fused to the handle. "I want to free myself from this half-existence," my grandfather said, his form beginning to flicker like a faulty projection. "But the clockwork requires balance. Someone must take my place." Horror washed over me as the door swung open, revealing not a room but a swirling vortex of architectural elements, fragments of buildings from different eras spinning around a massive clock mechanism at the center. The gears were made of materials that shouldn't exist, turning in directions that hurt the eyes to follow. "I won't go in there," I said, struggling against the invisible force pulling me forward. "You already are in there," he replied, his voice taking on the same metallic quality I'd heard in Eleanor's. "Part of you has been inside since birth. The Willis family has been bound to Greywood for generations." The security guard appeared beside us, no longer fully human. His uniform had begun to blend with his skin, his eyes now resembling the glass of streetlights. "It's time, Mr. Willis," he said. "The tower has waited long enough." I braced myself against the doorframe as the pull intensified. "There must be another way." "There is," came Eleanor's voice from within the vortex. She materialized partially at its edge, her form now thoroughly integrated with architectural elements, brick skin, window panel eyes, hair of twisted copper wires. "You can complete what we started. Stabilize the temple architecture rather than becoming consumed by it." "Ow!" I cried as the force grew stronger, my feet sliding toward the threshold. "The book," my grandfather said urgently. "The book you found in the library. It contains the original equations, the corrections to our work." "I don't have it anymore." "It disappeared when I returned to the library." Eleanor's window eyes flickered. "Not disappeared. Integrated. The knowledge is within you now." As if triggered by her words, equations and diagrams flooded my mind, complex geometrical patterns and mathematical formulas that somehow made perfect sense despite their impossibility. I saw where the original design had failed, creating a fracture in both physical space and time. The central gear, I gasped, the knowledge flowing through me. It's rotating counter to the natural flow of time. It needs to be reversed. My grandfather's form grew more solid briefly. Yes, but the mechanism can only be adjusted from within. I looked into the vortex, at the massive clockwork heart of Greywood. Someone needed to enter to reach the central mechanism. But entering meant risking the same fate as Eleanor, becoming permanently integrated into the city's impossible architecture. If I do this, I said, will I be able to leave afterward? Neither of them answered directly. Eleanor's brick-textured hand reached toward me. The city remembers those who shape it. Even if you become part of it, you won't be lost. Not entirely. Not the reassurance I was hoping for. The pull from the doorway intensified as the last light of day faded. Around us, the plaza began to shift more dramatically, buildings rotating, facades changing, the very ground rippling like water. Greywood was losing its stability as night fell. I made my decision. I'll try to fix it. But I need something to anchor me to reality, or I'll be absorbed like Eleanor was. My grandfather reached into his pocket and produced a small brass key. This was meant to wind the original clock. It exists in all temporal states simultaneously. Hold on to it, it may provide enough of a connection to the outside. I took the key, which felt impossibly heavy for its size. The moment it touched my palm, the pull from the doorway became irresistible. I was lifted off my feet and drawn into the vortex, the door slamming shut behind me. Inside was chaos, a maelstrom of architectural fragments swirling around the central clockwork. I glimpsed pieces of Greywood from every era, Gothic gargoyles flying past modern steel beams, Victorian ironwork twisting around digital billboards, all of it circling the massive clock mechanism at the center. Gravity seemed optional here. I floated among the debris, clutching the brass key that glowed with increasing intensity. Each tick of the central clock sent shockwaves through the space, momentarily freezing everything before releasing it into continuing chaos. I struggled toward the center, each movement feeling like swimming through molasses. The closer I got to the clock mechanism, the more I felt my own body wanting to fragment, my consciousness beginning to spread throughout the space, my physical form threatening to dissolve into the architectural soup. The key in my hand grew hotter, almost burning my skin, but I refused to let go. It was my only connection to my physical self. At the heart of the vortex hung the central gear, a massive brass wheel inscribed with symbols that shifted as I watched them. It turned steadily counterclockwise, grinding against the fabric of reality with each rotation. I reached for it, my fingers brushing the cold metal. Immediately, visions flooded my mind. I saw Greywood as it had been throughout history, as it was an alternative presence, as it might be in countless futures. I saw myself integrated into its structure, becoming another consciousness in its grand design. The temptation to surrender was overwhelming. To become part of something so vast, so eternal, to exist across time itself, offered a strange immortality. "Don't lose yourself," Eleanor's voice echoed around me. She appeared briefly, her form slightly more human than before. "Remember why you came." I gripped the key tighter, focusing on my purpose. With tremendous effort, I inserted it into the keyhole at the center of the gear. The fit was perfect, as if the key had been crafted specifically for this moment. Clockwise, my grandfather's voice instructed from nowhere and everywhere. Turn it clockwise to reverse the flow. I gripped the key with both hands and began to turn it clockwise. The resistance was immense, like trying to move a mountain with my bare hands. Every muscle strained as I fought against the mechanism's established momentum. "It's fighting back," I gasped, feeling my fingers begin to lose their solidity, becoming transparent at the edges. "The city doesn't want to change," Eleanor's voice echoed. "It's grown comfortable with its temporal instability." With a surge of desperate strength, I threw my whole being into turning the key. A terrible grinding noise filled the vortex as the gear's direction slowly began to reverse. The architectural debris swirling around me froze momentarily, suspended in the void. Then, with a thunderous crack, the central gear completed its reversal. The entire mechanism shuddered violently as the direction of flow changed, gears that had been moving counterclockwise for decades suddenly spinning in the opposite direction. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The vortex began to collapse, the architectural fragments rushing toward the center like water down a drain. I clung to the key, now firmly lodged in the central gear, as the space around me imploded. "Hold on," my grandfather's voice commanded. "The temporal realignment is beginning." The swirling chaos accelerated, fragments of Greywood's architecture flying past me with increasing speed. I glimpsed Eleanor, her form flickering between human and architectural, being drawn into the collapsing center along with everything else. "What's happening to her?" I shouted over the deafening noise. "She's being reintegrated," came the reply. "We all are." My own body began to feel strange, both more solid and less present, as if I existed in multiple states simultaneously. The brass key grew unbearably hot, but I couldn't release it even if I wanted to. My hands had partially merged with its metal surface. With a final, thunderous boom, the clockwork mechanism completed its reversal. The swirling debris froze in place, then began to move outward instead of inward, pieces of architecture flying back to where they belonged across space and time. I felt myself being pulled in multiple directions at once, my consciousness stretching thin across various planes of existence. For a moment, I was everywhere in Greywood simultaneously, inside every building, every street, every hidden corner of the city throughout its entire history. Then, abruptly, I was nowhere. A perfect, endless silence enveloped me. I floated in absolute darkness, without form or sensation. I couldn't tell if seconds or centuries passed in this void. Gradually, pinpricks of light appeared in the darkness, tiny windows back into reality. Through one, I saw the library where I found Eleanor's book. Through another, the hotel room where I'd spent my first night. Through a third, the ruined clock tower in the plaza. A voice, neither Eleanor's nor my grandfather's, but somehow both and neither, spoke from the darkness. "Choose carefully, Marcus Willis. Where you return will determine what you become." I understood then that each window represented a different outcome, a different version of myself. Some showed me fully integrated into Greywood's architecture, like Eleanor had been. Others showed me escaped but forever changed, like my grandfather. Still others showed me as I had been before, human, separate, unaware of the city's true nature. The window showing the clock tower grew brighter than the others, drawing me toward it. Through it, I could see the tower restored to its original glory, no longer a twisted ruin but a perfect blend of engineering and art. Standing at its base was a human figure, Eleanor, fully restored to her human form. I moved toward this window, instinctively feeling it was the right choice. As I approached, I heard Eleanor's voice one last time. "The city remembers those who heal it, Marcus. Some debts can be repaid." I passed through the window and into blinding light. When my vision cleared, I was standing at the base of the restored clock tower, the brass key still clutched in my hand, though both were now solid, normal, real. The plaza around me was calm and logical, buildings standing where they should, obeying the proper laws of physics and architecture. The clock on the tower read 12 noon exactly, its hands moving at the correct speed. "You did it," said a voice behind me. I turned to find Eleanor, fully human, wearing modern clothes, her eyes no longer windows but normal eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. "The temporal fracture is healed," she continued. "Greywood exists in one time again." "Are you real?" I asked, reaching out hesitantly to touch her arm. It felt solid, warm, alive. "As real as I can be," she replied. "The city gave me back my form as a gift for your service. It's not often someone sacrifices themselves to heal rather than exploit." "And my grandfather?" Her smile faltered slightly. "Some connections were too deeply embedded to fully restore. He exists now as the tower's caretaker, partly physical, partly metaphysical. You can visit him, though. He's waiting inside." I looked up at the massive clock tower, now a perfect example of architectural harmony rather than twisted impossibility. "So it's over? Greywood is normal now?" Eleanor laughed, a sound so wonderfully human it nearly brought tears to my eyes. "Normal? No. Greywood will never be normal. But it's stable now, and grateful. The buildings won't shift when you're not looking. The streets will stay where they're mapped. Time will flow at the same rate for everyone. And you? What will you do now?" "Live," she said simply. "For the first time since 1947, I'll live a human life. The city has given me a second chance." She held out her hand. "Would you like to see the tower from inside? Your grandfather has been waiting 70 years to properly meet you." As I took her hand, I felt a strange double awareness, part of me still connected to the architectural consciousness of Greywood, able to sense the heartbeat of the city beneath my feet and the whispers of its buildings in the breeze. But I remained primarily human, primarily myself. Together we walked toward the tower entrance, where a door, not the void portal I had entered earlier but a normal, wooden door, stood waiting. Above it, carved in stone, were the words, "Tempus neminem mene, sed omnes memorat, time waits for no one, but remembers all." Behind us, the city of Greywood continued its existence, no longer fractured across time but whole and singular. The clock struck 12:15, its chimes resonating with perfect acoustics across the plaza. For the first time since arriving, I felt no fear of the city's strange nature, only wonder at what I had become and what Greywood might still reveal to those who understood its architectural heart. The interior of the clock tower was nothing like I had imagined. Instead of dusty mechanical workings or ancient stone stairs, I entered what appeared to be a modern apartment, spacious and warmly lit, with comfortable furniture and bookshelves lining the walls. Only the gentle ticking sound permeating the space and the curved walls following the tower's cylindrical shape betrayed its true nature. "He's redesigned it over the decades," Eleanor explained, noticing my surprise. "When you're partially integrated with architecture, you develop certain creative liberties with space." A man stood by the window, not the 40-year-old version of my grandfather I'd seen earlier, but an elderly man who more closely matched the photographs I remembered. He turned as we entered, his eyes brightening with recognition. "Marcus," he said, his voice stronger than his apparent age would suggest. "You've done what I could not." We embraced, and I felt a strange current pass between us, like static electricity but warmer, deeper, a connection that transcended physical touch. When we separated, I noticed that his form occasionally flickered, becoming momentarily transparent before solidifying again. "You're still part of the tower," I observed. "And always will be," he confirmed. "Too many years bound to the clockwork to ever fully separate. But thanks to you, I have this much freedom at least." He gestured around the apartment. "I can create my own space, live a semblance of life." He led us to a sitting area where tea had already been prepared, the cups steaming as if freshly poured, though I hadn't seen or heard anyone in the kitchen. "You have questions," he said, settling into an armchair that seemed to adjust its shape to perfectly accommodate him. "About Greywood, about our family's connection to it, about what you experienced in the vortex." "For starters," I said, accepting a cup of tea that tasted exactly like the blend my mother used to make, "why me? Why was I drawn here?" My grandfather exchanged a glance with Eleanor before answering. "The Willis family has been bound to Greywood since its founding. Our ancestors were among the original architects who designed the city grid. What they didn't realize was that they were building on a nexus point, a location where the fabric of reality was already thin." "Like a ley line in folklore?" I asked. "Something like that," Eleanor interjected, "though more like a temporal fault line. Greywood grew along that fracture, absorbing the energies that bled through. Over generations, it developed a kind of consciousness, nothing human, but awareness nonetheless." My grandfather continued, "When Eleanor and I attempted to build the perfect clock tower, a structure that would serve as both the physical and temporal center of the city, we inadvertently created a catastrophic disruption. The tower became a pivot point around which time began to fragment. That's why the city's architecture was so chaotic, I realized. Buildings from different eras existing simultaneously, streets rearranging themselves." "Precisely," Eleanor said. "The city was trying to heal itself by integrating all possible versions of its existence. But without a stable center, the fractures only worsened." I sipped my tea, finding it increasingly difficult to maintain a sense of disbelief. After what I'd experienced, the impossible had become merely improbable. "So when I reset the clockwork, you restored the natural flow of time," my grandfather finished. "One timeline, one Greywood, though echoes remain." As if on cue, the walls of the apartment briefly rippled, revealing stone masonry behind modern drywall before settling back to their previous appearance. "Echoes like that," Eleanor said with a small smile. "The city remembers what it was, what it might have been. Those memories sometimes bleed through, especially here in the tower." "And what about me?" I asked the question that had been gnawing at me since my return from the vortex. "I don't feel entirely normal." My grandfather's expression grew serious. "You were exposed to the raw essence of the city's temporal consciousness. No one walks away from that unchanged. You've become something of a nexus point yourself, part human, part something else. What does that mean for my future?" The concern in my voice was evident. Eleanor reached over and took my hand. Her touch was warm, grounding. "It means you have choices that weren't available before. You can leave Greywood, return to your old life, though you'll always sense echoes of architectural consciousness wherever you go. Or I can stay," I finished. "Become part of whatever Greywood is now." "The city needs a guardian," my grandfather said. "Someone who understands its nature, who can maintain the balance we've restored. I've done what I could from within the tower, but my influence is limited to this structure. The rest of Greywood needs someone who can walk its streets." I stood and moved to the window. Outside, the view was impossibly high, far taller than the tower had appeared from the outside. I could see all of Greywood spread out below, a perfectly logical city grid now, buildings standing where they should, streets running in proper patterns. Yet I could also perceive faint overlays, ghost images of the city's alternative forms, transparent but present. If I became this guardian, I asked, would I end up like you? Bound to a single structure? No, Eleanor said, joining me at the window. What happened to your grandfather was the result of an accident, an uncontrolled fracture. What happened to me was surrender. I allowed myself to be absorbed completely. You've already demonstrated the ability to maintain your humanity while connecting with the city's consciousness. My grandfather rose from his chair, his form flickering more pronouncedly as he moved away from the center of the room. The choice is yours, Marcus. But don't decide immediately. Give yourself time to understand what you've become. A clock chimed somewhere deep within the tower, a different sound than the main clock face, more personal somehow. My grandfather glanced up. Our time is running short for today, he said. The tower can only maintain this much physical coherence for limited periods. You should both leave before the transition becomes uncomfortable for visitors. Eleanor nodded in understanding. We'll go. But we can return? Anytime, my grandfather assured us. The door will always open for both of you. As we prepared to leave, he pressed something into my hand, a small brass key, identical to the one I had used to reverse the clockwork but smaller, more personal. For emergencies, he explained. If the balance ever tips again, this will guide you back to the heart of the mechanism. Outside, the plaza was bathed in late afternoon sunlight, though I could have sworn we'd only spent an hour in the tower. The clock face above us read 5:30. Time still moves differently near the tower, Eleanor explained, noticing my confusion. Old habits die hard, even for cities. We walked together through a Greywood that now followed logical urban planning principles, but I occasionally noticed subtle anomalies, a building whose windows reflected a different time of day, a street corner where the pavement briefly rippled like water when no one was looking directly at it. You can see them too, can't you? Eleanor asked. The echoes. Yes, I admitted. It's like seeing multiple exposure photographs layered over reality. That's your connection to the city's consciousness, she said. It will grow stronger the longer you stay in Greywood. We stopped at a small cafe that hadn't been there during my previous walks through the city. Or perhaps it had, but in a different iteration of Greywood's reality. Over coffee, Eleanor told me more about her own experience, how after the accident in 1947, she had gradually surrendered her humanity to become part of Greywood's architectural consciousness, existing across all versions of the city simultaneously. How she had watched from windows and doorways as decades passed, unable to interact fully with the human world. Being restored to human form is overwhelming, she confessed. 78 years of existence without physical limitations, and now I'm confined to a single body, a single moment in time. Do you regret the change? I asked. She considered the question carefully. I miss certain aspects of that existence, the omniscience, the freedom from mortal concerns. But I had forgotten so much of what makes life precious. The taste of coffee, she lifted her cup, the warmth of sunlight, the simple pleasure of conversation without having to manipulate reality just to be heard. As evening approached, we parted ways near the hotel, which now appeared exactly as it should, a historic building maintained with proper care rather than the shifting, breathing entity I'd experienced on my first night. Eleanor promised to meet me the following day to continue exploring the new Greywood. In my room, I found my research papers neatly arranged on the desk, including notes I had no memory of taking about the city's architectural history. The handwriting was mine, but the content described buildings and urban planning theories I hadn't yet encountered. I realized with a start that these must be artifacts from another timeline, the academic work I would have produced if Greywood hadn't drawn me into its temporal crisis. Evidence that multiple versions of myself had existed in the fractured city. That night, my dreams were extraordinary. I soared above Greywood, seeing it not just as it was now, but as it had been throughout history and might be in countless futures. I perceived the city as a living entity, its streets like veins, its buildings like organs, all functioning together in architectural harmony. More strangely, I sensed that the city was dreaming too, and that our dreams had merged. Greywood was showing me its memories, its fears, its hopes. I saw the original settlers laying the first streets along the temporal fault line, unwittingly channeling energies they didn't understand. I witnessed the city's gradual awakening to consciousness over generations, yet struggled to maintain cohesion as the fracture widened. And I saw what might have happened had I failed to reset the clockwork, Greywood expanding its temporal instability outward, neighboring towns and eventually entire regions being drawn into its architectural chaos, reality itself unraveling from this nexus point. I woke at dawn, my body drenched in sweat but my mind clearer than it had ever been. On the nightstand beside me lay an object that hadn't been there when I fell asleep, a small model of the clock tower, perfectly detailed down to the tiny figures of Eleanor and myself standing at its base. A gift from the city, I realized. A reminder of what had been saved and what was still at stake. Outside my window, Greywood awaited, stable for now, but still echoing with the remnants of its fractured past. And somewhere within its streets, Eleanor was beginning her first full day of restored humanity in nearly 8 decades, while my grandfather maintained his vigilance from within the tower that had claimed him. I knew then that my decision had already been made. I would stay in Greywood, learn to navigate the echoes of its consciousness, and guard the delicate balance we had restored. My architectural research would continue, but with a purpose far beyond academic understanding. After all, cities are built by human hands but shaped by human lives. Greywood might be more conscious than most, but its story, past, present, and future, would be written by those who walked its streets and understood its architectural heart. And I was now one of them, not quite human, not quite architecture, but something new. A bridge between worlds, like the clock tower itself. 1 year after my arrival in Greywood, I stood at the window of my office in the city planning department, watching people move through the streets below. To casual observers, the city appeared entirely normal, a picturesque urban landscape with a thoughtful blend of historic preservation and modern development. Only I could see the occasional ripple in reality, the momentary echoes of what had once been a temporal fracture threatening to tear the city apart. My position as architectural consultant was officially a new initiative to maintain Greywood's unique character while guiding its development. Unofficially, I had become what my grandfather predicted, the city's guardian, attuned to its consciousness, sensitive to any disturbance in its carefully maintained balance. My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor, anomaly at Westridge and 7th. Meet me there? I grabbed my coat and the brass key I now carried everywhere, heading out into the crisp autumn morning. The familiarity of this routine still struck me as surreal at times, how casually we now address temporal disruptions and architectural impossibilities that would have broken my mind a year ago. Eleanor waited at the intersection, her dark hair now streaked with a single silver strand, a visible reminder of her restored humanity. After decades as part of Greywood's consciousness, she now aged like anyone else, a process she found both terrifying and exhilarating. There, she said, pointing to an alleyway between 2 buildings. To normal passers-by, it appeared as nothing more than a narrow passage between a bookstore and a cafe. But I could see what she saw, a shimmering distortion, like heat waves rising from hot pavement, except these ripples moved horizontally. Another bleed through? I asked, already knowing the answer. Started this morning. Mrs. Abernathy from the bookstore called me when her storage room suddenly grew an extra door that hadn't been there before. Eleanor had established herself as an architectural consultant as well, specializing in structural anomalies, a convenient cover for her real work helping me monitor Greywood's stability. Her history with the city made her particularly sensitive to these disruptions. We entered the alleyway, feeling the air grow dense around us. The brick walls on either side seemed to pulse slightly, the very matter of their construction becoming fluid at the edges. "It's stronger than the last one," Eleanor murmured, placing her palm against the wall. "More like the early days after the reset." I reached into my pocket, feeling the reassuring weight of the brass key. Over the past year, I had learned to use it as more than just an emergency measure. It had become a tool for making small adjustments to Greywood's temporal stability, like tuning a complex instrument. "Let's see what we're dealing with," I said, pressing my own hand to the wall. Immediately, my perception shifted. The alley dissolved around us, replaced by a bustling street from Greywood's past, horse-drawn carriages passing by, people in Victorian attire walking on wooden sidewalks. The buildings were younger versions of themselves, the bookstore now a milliner's shop, the cafe a smithy with open forge. "Late 1880s, Eleanor observed. "About when the original clock tower foundation was laid." "The city's remembering its origins," I said. "The question is, why now?" We moved through this temporal echo, invisible to the people of the past. Years of practice had taught us to navigate these pockets of displaced time without disrupting them. Our goal was always containment, not interference, letting the memory play out while preventing it from bleeding further into present-day Greywood. At the end of the street stood a man in formal attire, surveying the area with intense focus. He held blueprints and occasionally made notes in a small leather-bound book. "Nathaniel Willis," I whispered, recognizing my ancestor from old family photographs. The first of my family to work on Greywood's design. Eleanor's expression grew concerned. "I've never seen an echo manifest an actual person from the past before. Usually they're just impressions, ambient memories." "Something's different this time," I agreed. "It's more intentional." As if hearing us, Nathaniel looked up, his gaze seeming to fix directly on me despite our supposed invisibility within the temporal echo. He smiled, a familiar expression I had seen in mirrors and family photographs, and beckoned to us. "He can see us," Eleanor gasped. "I think he wants us to follow him," I said, already moving forward. Nathaniel turned and walked toward a construction site where the foundations of the clock tower were being laid. Workers moved around us, unaware of our presence even as we followed my ancestor through their midst. At the center of the foundation, Nathaniel stopped and knelt, brushing dirt away from something embedded in the stone. He looked up at me again, his expression urgent now, and pointed to the object. I knelt beside him, though separated by over a century, and examined what he had uncovered, a small metal device resembling a pocket watch but with multiple dials and hands. It was built into the very foundation of the tower, sealed beneath what would become tons of stone and iron. "A temporal anchor," Eleanor breathed, leaning closer. "I've seen references to these in old texts, but never an actual device. They were theoretical, ways to stabilize buildings constructed on nexus points. My family knew, I realized. They knew from the beginning that Greywood was built on a temporal fault line. They tried to contain it." Nathaniel nodded vigorously, though he couldn't hear our words. He pointed to the device, then to me, then made a turning motion with his hand. "He wants you to adjust it," Eleanor said. But how? It's in his time, not ours. The brass key grew warm in my pocket. I pulled it out, and in the strange light of the temporal echo, it gleamed with unusual brilliance. Nathaniel's eyes widened at the sight of it, and he nodded emphatically. The key, I said, understanding dawning. It's not just connected to the clock tower mechanism. It's connected to all of the temporal engineering my family built into Greywood. I reached toward the device, expecting my hand to pass through it as an echo from another time. Instead, the moment the key neared the temporal anchor, both became solid and real. The key fit perfectly into a small keyhole in the device's side that had been hidden beneath a decorative flourish. Careful, Eleanor warned. We don't know what altering the past might do to our present. I don't think I'm altering the past, I said slowly, understanding as the words left my mouth. I think this is why I was drawn to Greywood in the first place. This moment was always going to happen. My ancestor built this knowing someday I would need to maintain it. With a deep breath, I turned the key. The device clicked and whirred, its multiple dials realigning themselves. The air around us seemed to compress then expand, a wave of energy pulsing outward from the temporal anchor. The Victorian street scene began to fade, reality reasserting itself. The last thing I saw before the echo disappeared completely was Nathaniel Willis's satisfied smile and a small salute of acknowledgement. We were back in the alley of present-day Greywood, but something had changed. The walls no longer pulsed, the air no longer felt dense with temporal energy. And when I looked closely, I could see tiny, intricate patterns in the brickwork that hadn't been visible before, patterns that matched the dials on the temporal anchor. It's all through the city, I said, running my fingers over the markings. My family built a network of these anchors, disguised as architectural details. Eleanor examined the patterns with wonder. A temporal support structure, hidden in plain sight. No wonder Greywood's consciousness developed so differently from other cities. It was designed to channel and contain these energies. My phone buzzed again, a text from the caretaker of the clock tower, the only staff member aware of my grandfather's continued existence within the structure. Your grandfather requests your presence urgently, it read. He says the tower is remembering. Eleanor and I exchanged glances and hurried across town to the plaza. The clock tower stood as it had for the past year, restored, stable, the architectural centerpiece of Greywood. But as we approached, I could see subtle changes in its appearance, details shifting slightly, materials taking on different textures momentarily before returning to normal. Inside, the tower's interior had transformed. The modern apartment was gone, replaced by the original mechanical heart of the clock, massive gears and counterweights, pendulums and springs, all moving in perfect synchronization. And standing amidst it all was my grandfather, more solid and present than I had seen him since resetting the clockwork. You found it, he said without preamble. The first anchor. You knew about them? I asked. I suspected, he replied. Family legends mention safeguards built into the city, but by my time, the knowledge had been lost. When I worked with Eleanor on the tower renovation in 1947, we were operating blind, trying to enhance what we thought was merely an architectural curiosity. He gestured to the clockwork around us. This tower was meant to be the master control for the entire network. When we activated it without understanding the full system, we shattered the very thing we were trying to perfect. And now? Eleanor asked. Now the city is remembering its original design, my grandfather said. Your adjustment of the anchor has triggered a cascade effect. The entire network is reactivating. As if to confirm his words, the brass key in my hand began to glow with a soft light, and I felt a series of resonant pulses, like distant heartbeats, spreading throughout Greywood. What does this mean for the city? I asked. For its consciousness? It means Greywood can now exist as it was meant to, my grandfather said. Not fractured across time, not forcibly stabilized, but naturally balanced, a city that exists primarily in the present while maintaining awareness of its past and future. Eleanor moved to the tower's window, gazing out at the cityscape below. I can feel the difference already. The echoes aren't gone, but they're harmonized. Like different instruments in an orchestra rather than competing sounds. My grandfather's form began to change as he spoke, becoming both more and less solid simultaneously, more defined in appearance but more transparent, as if merging more completely with the tower while also becoming more distinctly himself. What's happening to you? I asked, alarmed. The final integration, he said, his voice resonating through the clockwork. With the anchor network restored, my role is changing. I'm becoming less a prisoner of the tower and more its conscious keeper. Are you leaving? The thought brought unexpected grief. Not leaving, he assured me. Evolving. I'll still be here, more present in some ways, though less visible. The tower has always needed a human consciousness to direct its operations. He turned to Eleanor. You were right to bring him here. The Willis family built these safeguards, or Willis must maintain them. And what about me? Eleanor asked quietly. Now that the city is properly stabilized, what happens to my connection to it? My grandfather smiled gently. That's entirely your choice now. You assert your sentence as part of Greywood's consciousness. You can remain fully human, living out a normal lifespan if you wish. She looked thoughtful, gazing out at the city she had been part of for so long. And if I don't wish that? If I miss certain aspects of what I was? Then there are compromises available, he said, glancing meaningfully at me. As Marcus has discovered. I understood then that my own transformation over the past year, my growing connection to Greywood's architectural consciousness while maintaining my humanity, represented a middle path that hadn't been available to either of them during the city's fractured state. The Guardian needs a guide, I said to Eleanor. Someone who remembers what the city was, even as we help shape what it will become. Outside the tower, Greywood continued its daily rhythms, people moving through streets, entering and exiting buildings, living their lives unaware of the temporal complexities surrounding them. But now I could perceive the anchor network humming beneath it all, a system designed generations ago to allow a city built on a nexus point to exist in stable harmony with the energies flowing through it. My grandfather placed his hands on the central gear of the clock mechanism. It's time for me to fully embrace my role here. The transition will be intense. You should both leave the tower for now. We said our goodbyes, knowing they weren't final but understanding that his form and presence would be different when we next met. As we descended the tower stairs, the entire structure began to resonate with a deep, harmonious tone that seemed to connect with points throughout the city. Standing in the plaza, we watched as the clock tower briefly shimmered with energy, its appearance cycling rapidly through all the forms it had taken throughout Greywood's history before settling back into its current state, though now with a subtle luminosity visible to our enhanced perception. What now? Eleanor asked as the resonance faded and the city settled into its new equilibrium. I looked at the brass key in my hand, now inscribed with tiny markings that matched the anchor network pattern. Now we maintain the balance. We find the remaining anchors, ensure they're properly tuned. We watch for new fractures, new echoes that need harmonizing. A lifetime's work, she observed. Several lifetimes, I corrected, thinking of my ancestors who had built the system, my grandfather who had become part of it, and now myself continuing the legacy. But we don't have to do it alone. As evening fell, lights began to illuminate Greywood, street lamps and building windows creating a tapestry of illumination across the cityscape. To most observers, it was simply a beautiful urban night scene. But Eleanor and I could see the patterns within the light, the subtle geometries that revealed the anchor network's influence. "It's beautiful," Eleanor whispered. All this time, I was part of something so perfectly designed, and I never fully understood it. "That's architecture at its best," I said. "Structure that supports without constraining, design that guides without controlling." We walked through Greywood streets, seeing both the city as it appeared to everyone else and the complex temporal engineering that allowed it to exist in stable harmony with the nexus energies beneath it. Occasionally, we passed places where the echoes were stronger, pockets where the past or possible futures bled through more visibly, and made small adjustments with the brass key to maintain the balance. This was our new normal, guardians of a city that existed simultaneously as physical construction and conscious entity. The work would never be complete, for cities are never truly finished. They grow, change, evolve with each generation that inhabits them. But now Greywood could evolve naturally, its unique nature a strength rather than a catastrophe waiting to happen. And within its architectural heart, my grandfather kept watch from the clock tower, while Eleanor and I walked its streets, all of us connected by more than family ties or shared experience, connected by the very consciousness of the city itself. As midnight approached, we returned to the plaza where my journey had begun a year ago. The clock tower struck 12, its tone resonating through Greywood with perfect acoustics. For a moment, I could swear I saw every version of the city superimposed, past, present, and future all existing simultaneously in perfect harmony. Then the moment passed, and it was just Greywood on a clear autumn night, a city with secrets in its architecture, memories in its streets, and guardians who understood its peculiar heartbeat. Eleanor took my hand, her fingers entwining with mine. Together, we had become something neither of us could have imagined, not quite human, not quite architecture, but perfectly suited to the city we had helped heal. "Welcome home," she said softly, as Greywood embraced us in its unique reality. And I knew then that I had found my place, not in the academic world I had left behind, but here in this city that existed between moments, between states of being. A city that had called to my bloodline for generations, finally finding in me the guardian it needed. The clock tower chimed once more, a 13th hour that existed only for those attuned to Greywood's true nature. And as that impossible hour began, the city settled into its new existence, its consciousness embracing all who walked its streets while revealing its deepest secrets only to those who had earned the right to perceive them. The night odyssey in the forgotten city had ended. The lifetime as Greywood's guardian had just begun. Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.